Welcome, everyone. I now call the June 11th, 2024 regular City Council meeting to order. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. At this point, we'll take a moment to take roll of the council members by position number. Please say here when the city clerk calls your name. City clerk.
Thank you. Councilmember Zorns.
Here.
Mayor Thompson.
Here.
Councilmember Aldorks.
Here.
Councilmember Kurd.
Here.
Councilmember Menke.
Here.
Councilmember Dodd.
Here.
Deputy Mayor Alcabra.
Here.
All present.
Thank you. Before we continue with the rest of the agenda, I'd like to reiterate some meeting guidelines. For remote meeting attendees, please speak clearly and pause frequently. Mute your microphone when not speaking. And for council attending remotely, use the raise hand feature when you wish to speak. Tonight's agenda included an executive session and associated item as items 11A and 12A. Before seeking approval of the agenda, I want...
Sorry, that's last week. Sorry.
I was looking at my watch being like, this is today, right?
Yep. Sorry, that's from last week. Just
Perfect. We'll just roll past that and ask if there's any changes to tonight's agenda.
sorry about that.
That's okay. Seeing none, I'll move on to public engagement opportunities. We've got a Park at Bothell Landing project. There's an open house on Thursday, June 13th from 6 to 8 p.m. at the Park at Bothell Landing. You can connect with park experts and share your thoughts on 3 potential design concepts. We've got a Human Services Needs Assessment Survey that's live right now through June 18th, where you can share your experiences, needs, or concerns to help us make better planning decisions and to know where to allocate resources. And we're going to celebrate Pollinator Week, June 17th through 23rd. You can learn how you can support pollinators, take the Pollinator Pop Quiz, and request a free packet of pollinator seed mix to plant, all at bothellwa.gov/pollinators. And I'm sure Councilmember Zorns will be joining you. All right. Next up, we have a couple proclamations. The first one is for Juneteenth. Whereas Juneteenth is recognized every year on June 19th to commemorate the day when 250,000 enslaved Black Americans in the state of Texas, which acted as the last bastion for slavery during the final days of the Civil War, were declared free by the United States Army. And whereas despite the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation 2.5 years earlier, many enslavers continued to hold enslaved Black people captive until June 19th, 1865, which became a symbolic date representing African American freedom and liberation. And whereas in order that we may never forget the evils of slavery in the United States and its aftermath, we must acknowledge the injustices and suffering experienced under slavery. And whereas we recognize the significance of Juneteenth and the importance of continuing to engage in dialogue about race and racism in the United States to promote racial healing, recognition, and justice. And whereas we know that honoring Juneteenth is a symbolic step toward a more racially just and equitable community that must be accompanied by action to eradicate systemic racism, and we recommit ourselves to working together toward this goal. Now, therefore, I, Mason Thompson, Mayor of the City of Bothell, do hereby proclaim June 19th, 2024 as Juneteenth in the City of Bothell to promote healing, justice, and unity by recognizing the painful origins of this day and reaffirming our commitment to working toward equitable experiences and opportunities for all those in our community. And I believe we have Sherry Davenport here to accept.
All right, thank you very much. My name is Sherry Davenport. I'm the Vice President for Equity and Inclusion at Cascadia College. I'd like to thank Mr. Mayor, City Council members. I am honored to accept this proclamation and wanted to share that this is especially extraordinary for me, as I am a direct descendant of the African slaves in Texas for which this proclamation is written. Both my paternal and maternal great-great-great-grandparents were among those Africans enslaved in Texas in 1862, and they were among the slaves who continued to live in bondage, were sold and tortured for another 2.5 years until the word of freedom finally reached them on June 19th, 1865. I grew up in Colorado, and I have fond memories of celebrating Juneteenth with family and friends, attending parades and learning the importance of the statement, "Never forget." I also was able to attend some of the celebrations in Texas, and although we have celebrations all over the country, the celebrations in Texas are truly something to see. As I think about the legacy of my ancestors, I think about the fact that I stand here today and have nothing but gratitude for their sacrifices and endurance, and I thank the City of Bothell for taking the step to support diversity, equity, and inclusion for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next up, we have a proclamation for Orca Action Month. Whereas the southern resident orcas were listed as endangered in November 2005 under the Endangered Species Act, and whereas major factors in the decline of southern resident orca population include dwindling salmon runs, toxic pollution, loss of habitat, and increased vessel traffic noise in the ocean and Puget Sound, and whereas during the month of June, the Orca Network, the Orca Salmon Alliance, and other organizations working on these issues joined together in a month-long focused effort to educate the public and take action to improve conditions for the survival of the southern resident orcas. And whereas bringing attention to the orcas also brings attention to the need to clean up Puget Sound watersheds and restore and conserve important habitats for Chinook salmon, including the Sammamish River and local Bothell streams. And whereas the Bothell City Council's 2040 vision includes environmental stewardship, highlighting verdant habitats, cool streams, thriving salmon, and our community's mental and physical health, because we value and protect our abundant ecological resources. Now, therefore, I, Mason Thompson, Mayor of the City of Bothell, do hereby proclaim the month of June 2024 as Orca Action Month to call attention to the plight of the fragile southern resident community of orcas and to urge action restoring rivers and streams which support salmon as a critical food source for whales and clean water for us all. And I believe we have Rachel Coots here from Whale Scout to accept.
Good evening, Council. My name is Rachel Coots. I am the Student and Community Education Coordinator with Whale Scout, a local nonprofit. Our mission is to engage communities in action in restoring salmon habitat for endangered orcas. My time working with Whale Scout, I have witnessed firsthand the power of collective action and the impact of shared dedication. I've seen how passionate people are when they congregate around a shared love of salmon and our orcas. I've been with Whale Scout for a year now and started out as an intern. I began to learn that stewardship is much more than just caring for our environment. It's about fostering a sense of belonging and ensuring that our community thrives for generations to come. It's also about understanding that our actions today shape the future we want to see and the animals we want to protect. Although I am not personally a Bothell resident, I feel a part of the community. I have talked to so many people who have attended our volunteer events, and I often ask them why they wanted to spend their weekend pulling blackberries in the dead of the summer or planting trees in the rain and the mud. Many of them tell me it's because they understand that being a steward of their community is not just a role, it's a calling. It's a profound responsibility to take care for and nurture the place they call home. The dedication that the people of Bothell have to this town is inspiring, and it makes me want to keep working to provide them with more opportunities to protect our environment and the wildlife that live here. Orca Action Month is a regional effort to draw attention and take meaningful action to recover the endangered southern resident killer whales and the salmon they depend on. This year's theme is Clean Water, Healthy Futures, highlighting the essential life-giving element that unifies us all. There are many ways to get involved in Orca Action Month in June. The website orcamonth.com lists events and actions where everyone can participate. Whale Scout also regularly hosts community habitat restoration events in partnership with Bothell Parks at the former Wayne Golf Course. Whale Scout also has some really exciting community education events coming this summer, so check out our website for more information. I also really want to give a special thanks to the City Council staff in our community for the dedication to recovering and stewarding the endangered species and the ecosystems we live in together. Thank you for your leadership in addressing climate change here in Bothell, reducing stormwater runoff, and protecting tree canopy coverage and open space throughout the city. And thank you for listening.
Thank you. Did you guys want to get a picture with us? Yeah. All right. All right, next up is public comment. The city has accepted public comment in writing as well as accepted sign-up sheets for those who wish to speak at tonight's meeting. Written comments submitted to the city clerk no later than 3 p.m. today were forwarded to all city council members and are part of the record. When the clerk calls your name, you will have 3 minutes to speak. Please note that council will receive your input, but upon the advice of our city attorney, we do not engage in discussion of these topics. Staff will make note of items requiring follow-up. City clerk?
Thank you, Mayor Thompson. We had one person write in regarding school zone cameras and fines. That was Harvey Goodwin. So we will, you've all received that, and that will be part of the record. I do not have anybody else who signed up to speak. However, if anybody in the audience, which I don't see, I do have a couple people in the virtual audience. And Mr. Swanson, I will panel you in so you can speak. You'll have 3 minutes. Can you hear us, Mr. Swanson? You're on mute.
Oh, I'm sorry. You can hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Glad to see the proclamation for the orcas. As you know, the South Sound orcas are endangered. 35% of their diet is coho salmon. Unfortunately, we as a city have not really been taking care of the 1.6 miles of Snohomish River because we are dumping a bunch of tire wear particles into it, which causes almost 90% mortality rate for not only coho salmon, but for brook trout and rainbow trout. As we continue to increase urban density, we are increasing stormwater runoff, and particular stormwater runoff peaks. Unfortunately, stormwater catch basins do not stop the 6-ppd quinone poisoning that's killing the salmon. The tire dust goes into the catch basins. It's not exposed to UV light. It sits there at the bottom, heavier than water. Rainwater has ozone in it. It releases not 6 ppd, which is relatively harmless, but 6 ppd quinone. Now, if we would stop paving over our grasslands and our open spaces, then the tire wear particles will fall on the grass, be exposed to UV light from the sunshine, and it won't transfer into 6 ppd quinone, which kills coho salmon, and the killer whales, it just evaporates up in the air. No harm, no foul, mostly. But we do have problems with plasticosis, which is ingesting these tiny 25 micron plastic particles. The only way to stop this is to stop urban densification and stop going towards electrical vehicles, which are 25% heavier and produce 25% more tire wear particles than a normal family automobile, gasoline powered. Metro buses are even worse. At 72,000 gross vehicle weight, these things produce between 100 and 200 times the tire wear particles. Do you really think bringing a whole bunch of inner city buses down Reeder Way and the newly widened Northeast 185th is a good idea? Is that really science? Are you really protecting the orcas? What are you doing for the proclamation? I'll tell you what you can do. You can follow our comprehensive plan. You don't have to have just option 1, option 2, option 3. Jesse Hartman, the Burke individual, said, hey, we don't have to have just one of the 3. We can mix and match them. And of course, Kerry Westerbeck said, hey, let's do option 2, which grows us at like 3 or 4 or 5 or even 6 times the rate of King and Snohomish County growth rates.
Thank you, Mr.
I don't know what
Swanson.
you
Your
guys
time
are
is up.
doing,
Thank you.
but stop.
That is all I have, Mayor.
Thank you, City Clerk. All right, next up, we have reports. First up is the City Manager report. City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor, and I'll be quick because I do feel like most of this meeting is the City Manager's report tonight. But one thing I wanted to bring to Council's attention is that at your dais this evening and for Councilmember Aldrich's in your email inbox is a brief memo and an attached sample letter that we received from Lake Forest Park requesting a letter of support towards a funding package that they are putting forward to the state in the form of a loan for a roundabout project at State Route 104 and 40th Place Northeast. Staff has reviewed the letter and the project, and we do not see any conflict with anything in our pipeline, any projects in our pipeline, as well as, again, this isn't something that would be competitive against any funding requests that the city would have. We would still be eligible to make the similar request if we were so inclined. So with that, just wanted to bring this to council awareness for concurrence. In other words, if there's no objections, then we'll format the letter for the mayor's signature.
Councilmember Curd?
Yeah, do we normally provide letters of support for neighboring jurisdictions for projects that don't really benefit the city?
Yeah, I think the logic here from Lake Forest Park was that there is a downstream effect for flow on State Route 522 that if 104 backs up, that it can back up onto 522, and with the partnership for BRT, that was, I think, why they thought of Bothell. We do frequently get letters of request for funding requests. Primarily, it's typically, I think, in my couple of years that I've been here, it's been for federal projects and larger projects. But certainly, there's nothing against this one. And then, in terms of, I think there was another part of your question of maybe not if that answered it or not.
Yeah, I think you answered it. I'm inclined to not set a precedent of writing letters of support for small projects. I don't really see the connection with Bothell, especially when BRT is, on 522 all the way up to 40th Place. That's not really necessarily a bottleneck for BRT anyway. I'm just not really seeing the connection with why it's coming to the city so much. So, I mean, if everyone else wants to go along with it, that's fine, but I would just maybe flag it. I don't necessarily think that we need to sign it.
Okay.
Councilmember Zorns?
2 things. I need a copy of it. And then here, I just got one. Is this a surplus for somebody? That's all right. You keep it. That's okay. Thank you, though. Thanks. But I appreciate Councilmember Curd's comment about setting precedents. Though I'd love to see Ballinger Way have more free flow to it, having driven that many times to try to get into Edmonds during peak traffic hour. Setting a precedence could we might find ourselves in a place where we really don't want to participate, and yet we've been doing it. So I'm with you on that one.
Anybody else? Councilmember Curd?
Yeah, and I think it just kind of underscores, like, if we're not asking the city of Lake Forest Park for our own capital facility list projects that we go out for, I don't see why we should reciprocate necessarily just because we see this the one time. I also don't know, what is the pedestrian outlook here? What are the other benefits that are coming from this? I just don't have enough information from their just brief requests to know that if it aligns with, our values. So I'm just...
The one thing I was going to continue on your original question. I lost my thread. The one thing I would point out is that we do also have a practice of requesting letters for when we're seeking funding from other jurisdictions as well. So I just do want to note that is that it's not an unusual thing, but your point is well taken, and it will help us to be able to communicate to cities as they are seeking support of looking if the council is interested in a more robust background of the project, including pedestrian access, then we can certainly ask for that as the letters come through.
Thanks for that clarification. I think, again, I'd be willing to support it this time, but I'm really cautious to just set a precedent. So whatever's needed.
Councilmember Dodd?
Thank you. I echo both Councilmembers Curd and Zorns. I don't know that I understand our connection at this point, and I hope that it does not hinge on us sending a letter, so I'm comfortable just staying out of it.
Councilmember Mankey?
Similar feelings for me. I just mapped it out because I was curious how far away it is. It is 4.7 miles from City Hall. And if it's related to traffic backing up, traffic is what it is on that street, and 5 miles nearly is pretty far away. Precedence is something definitely that we should consider. It's interesting to hear that we do send out letters to other cities too. So I don't know what our response rate we get on those things are, and if it actually serves to help us or not in doing that. But it does seem like quite a bit of a distance. It's not even directly next door. It's next door to next door, which is a distance away. So I'm not 100% sold on it, but I could be persuaded if a majority of council wanted to do it.
Deputy Mayor?
Thank you, Mayor. I hear everybody here. I'm going to be in the dissenting vote because I think staff has already looked into it. They didn't see any problems. It's an act of goodwill, city to city. I don't see a problem. I didn't see any problem with it. I would be okay with it. Just wanted to say that.
I don't particularly feel like having a vote in which we disagree on something like this. So I'd just say maybe let's have some more conversations over the next week. If anybody has questions, reach out to the city manager, and depending on how those conversations go, we could potentially bring it back.
Again, it's also very helpful to have some feedback for, again, future requests. So
Yep.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, is that the end of the city manager report? Fantastic. Next up is council committee reports, community reports, and conversations. All right, in that case, we're going to move on to projected agenda discussion. We just can't wait to get to the study sessions tonight, I can tell. All right. Next up is a study session. We're going to be down there. It's 6:24. We'll be back at 6:30 down there. 2025-26 Budget Planning Process Introduction. That's Agenda Bill 24091. And I'm going to kick it over to the city manager.
Thank you, Mayor, and good evening, City Council. We are for sure settling in for a long stretch of study sessions tonight. But the intent of tonight's meeting really is to focus on preparation for our 25-26 budget development, and then including then our 7-year capital facilities plan. As the council is aware, we'll be coming to you in the fall with a preliminary budget that then the council gets to review, make changes to, and then our goal is always adoption in December. We'll see a calendar here later on tonight with the steps that are anticipated. The purpose for tonight's meeting is to get the conversation started as early as possible. And as I've been reflecting back on the last time we did this, there's quite a bit that has changed for me for the better in terms of anxiety levels. I recognize that I had not actually, at this point 2 years ago, I was not yet employed. I was close, but not quite yet employed. And we got through it. And I'm thankful for, in the room tonight, we had Ten Raiden and Gretchen Zendel, who really stepped up as co-deputy directors of the finance department as we pulled the budget together. But we've seen changes, obviously, and there's been some, we have things like the council vision and priorities. We have a finance director and a deputy director, which is probably a couple of the key things that make me feel good going into this too, is that we're, as a team, able to really be focused on the direction of where do we know already, because we've gotten direction from the city council on interests of the budget without having that direct conversation. So currently, the executive leadership team is working with the departments and together to look at what are the investments that we'd be proposing to come forward in the budget. That'll be coming to me soon, and then we'll spend some time pulling that together. We'll start meeting, and in the fall, we'll have a series of discussions. Essentially, every council meeting in the fall will have a budget component. So stepping back to where we're at tonight then, what I want to emphasize is that we are not asking for any decisions tonight. We'll certainly get some direction, some questions that we know that we need to address as we bring back that initial funding package of a budget. And there may be additional study sessions, there may be additional one-on-one meetings that we can schedule, but to really help dig into the information that's going to help you get to the point of being able to adopt in confidence a 2-year budget. And again, this is just one of those things that's ingrained in me in terms of when I think about the work that you do as the elected representatives for this community. I think the budget document is one of the most impactful policy that you will see on every 2-year basis, because it is setting the direction for what is the work that is going to be done. The series of study sessions then tonight flows with intention. So we're going to do a brief overview, and that overview is intended to really show where are we at today, what have we learned over the last few years, and how does that set us up for future decisions. We will then also have the second study session topic is a focus on revenues, including what is the performance of our existing revenue package, and then consideration of potential additional revenues. And we won't dwell too much into too much detail there, but this is a series of conversations that's building on each other. As council will recall, for 5 of you, 2 years ago there was a budget workshop that was really focused on educating the council on all of the conceivable revenue packages available. What is coming forward tonight is ones that, from a staff recommendation, we would say, if you were going to consider anything in the near term, these are the ones that would be the most recommended ones to go forward with. But again, you may have other ideas, and we're here for that feedback. We will then move into on that topic of revenues. In that conversation as well, spoiler alert, we're in a good position, and when you're in a good position, it gives you the opportunity to make decisions for the future. So one of the things that our finance director will talk to you about too is consideration of some amendment to the reserve policy. With the third study session, after this introduction, is Safe Streets and Sidewalks. As council is most likely aware, there is a current levy that will be expiring in 2025, so mid-year through the biennial budget. And so wanting to start a conversation now too of what is future direction that the council would want to pursue related to that? And we're here tonight with options. You'll see that, and including there is the option of there's always the do nothing option. So we don't want to take anything off the table. So getting feedback on that will be helpful. We will then flow into that see what I did there, utility rates. And council saw this quite a bit in the fall. One of the things that we did receive was direction in the fall was the idea of as opposed to coming forward with annual utility rate reviews, of tying that to the biennial budget. And so looking at utility rates in 2-year views. And so that's a conversation that will also start tonight that will help dictate what comes back in the fall. And then finally, the capital facilities plan. And as council will recall, when we were appointing committees at the beginning of the year, there was great interest from the council of having conversations about the capital facilities plan. So as an alternative to what had been done in the last few years of having a council committee with then the addition of the finance director, the city manager, and representatives from the Parks Board and the Planning Commission, we are bringing information about the capital facilities plan to the full council, as well as there will be specific check-ins with both of the Parks Board, the full Parks Board and the full Planning Commission, and that information will also come back to council. So that's the overview of tonight's menu. I will also point out that we are trying to flow into each topic, so we're trying to minimize the transition time. But at any point, this is a lot of information. It's a lot of numbers flowing at you. So if we need a break, that's also, please advocate for yourselves.
Yeah, don't wait for me. If you need to take a break, say the word.
So the first slide before I transition over to Kwan is I wanted to talk briefly about what have we learned so far in the current biennium that we're in. And as I mentioned, when we started out then of putting this budget together for 23 and 24, there was a lot of unknowns. There's certainly been a lot of unknowns in the biennium before too, coming at being in COVID and really looking at things. And then as we were coming out, we had, like any year, there was some assumptions that we had to make about what was going to be our revenue forecast and what we're going to do. And you'll probably recall one of the big themes of our budget was that it was a foundational budget. We were trying to have a financial picture that we could build from, as opposed to making decisions that could potentially put us in a position where we had hard financial decisions to make because we were trending in the wrong direction. And what I will also add is that the good news is as we will read about other jurisdictions in our region that are going to be facing difficult decisions over the next 6 months around their budgets, we are in a good financial position to be able to make future focused decisions to keep us on a positive path. So I'm really thankful for, I think Kwan and I talk quite frequently of how we've benefited from good leadership and sound decision making, which puts us in that position where we're both incredibly grateful for that. Also, what I wanted to point out is in my budget transmittal letter, we talked about some of the investments of the 23-24 budget that we were going to make, and there was a number of deferred maintenance and different things that just had been a not yet position. And we went ahead and put some of those back into the budget of let's move forward and take care of the assets that we have, do some asset replacement, start doing some studies so we can position ourselves for 25, 26 to know what the right path is. Things like the council requested the electric vehicle study. We are looking at a human services needs assessment. We're trying to do the work now to set us up for future decisions. And there was an acknowledgement in that letter that we had the potential of needing to dip into reserves to do some of that. But what I'll emphasize is every time we do a budget, probably the very next day after it's adopted, we will celebrate that the budget is adopted, and then there will be something that happens where the budget will be wrong. This is not a document that is intended to be perfect, but we do want to do our best to be the most accurate that we can around what to expect, because it's very helpful to be able to know what can we take on, what can't we take on, and make good decisions going forward. So what I wanted to emphasize is that while you're still halfway to go in 2024, what we've learned from the last year is that while there was a potential that we might have to tap into reserves or we may have to make adjustments, fortunately our revenues have, as you'll see on the chart, have exceeded what we had anticipated. And our expenditures have been slightly below what we anticipated. And so because of that, well, we did end up 2023 in a healthy place. We're looking at similar trends for 2024. And so again, with that, some of the things that we're learning is as we look at our revenue projections and we look at our expenditures, we're trying to learn from what are we seeing in the new economy of, I mean, you may remember, actually, I think it was the week of our budget adoption, we had another city in the region who put a halt on they delayed their budget a couple of weeks because they were worried about recessions and layoffs that were happening in the tech industry and not knowing what the consequences would be. And so there certainly was unknowns, but we're learning from what the new economy is post-COVID. We're learning what the implications of some of the different financial choices we have. And we've also, as Kwan will cover, we have benefited from, I think, two things. One is that the interest rates are higher, and so we have investments. But what I really want to also, before I turn it over to our finance director, who won't take credit, but I'm really thankful for a finance team who has been actively managing the city's finances as well, of not just processing invoices, but being strategic about looking at where are we investing our funds and what are we doing with them. And we've had a very healthy rate of return. So we can't always count on those things, but what we're trying to learn is how can we anticipate and how can we true up what our forecast is to what reality will be. And when we get it wrong, because we will get it wrong, we will continue to bring decisions forward to council that tell us if we need to adjust up or down. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to our finance director, Kwan Wong, who is going to guide us through quite a bit this evening. So Kwan, all yours.
All right. Thank you, Kyle, for really laying the groundwork for our discussion, not just this evening, but between now and October when we come to you with a proposed budget. And then by December, we will have a balanced budget adopted by you. So this is just the first of many conversations. And again, as Kyle said, we both inherited a really strong budget with even surplus. And I want to thank my team as well as the department directors who really manage their budget so that where we are is mostly the work of their staff and their leadership. Because if you look at the expenditures, we are really right on target. That's not by miracle, but that's really by strong management. So I want to recognize them. The revenues pretty much is a surprise to me because I have been telling people that there's always a structural problem with any city governments because revenues will never catch up with expenditures. So that is the reality. But we got really a couple surprises, and mostly because of the high interest earning that we are getting. So we'll talk more about that. But overall, the revenue pictures still look good. So that's the 2023. In 24, with almost like 6 months into the year, we are seeing a positive trend. We are not giving you any negative news that we are not going to meet our budget. So the good news is, again, thanks to your leadership, we have been spending very conservatively, and we have been managing our organization in a very long-term lens instead of just focusing on what am I able to spend in the next year. So thank you for that. So let me talk about the revenues, and I will explore more of the options later on with Andrew in our second part of the presentation. So this is, again, looking in the past, but we will be looking most of our evening looking into the future, and not just looking at a balanced budget for 25 and 26, but because of your direction, you gave us a direction as a result of last retreat that you want a long-term and stable budget. So we take that into heart. And so whatever that we're going to give to you, we'll honor that. So it's not just, hey, can we balance the budget? But can we balance the budget for the good of the long term and in a very stable environment? So in terms of the general fund revenues that we observed, at the end of 2023, most of the revenues are coming in on target. The property tax, we are just within target. And again, thanks to the forecast work by our staff. Sales and use tax, in the next presentation, we'll look at the longer-term trends. But we are seeing people are still spending. And because of that, tax is very economically sensitive. But because of people are still buying on the internet, and as a result, they are not going to our neighbors' shopping mall, and we are benefiting from those changed behaviors. So keep on spending, but use your internet to buy stuff, because that will benefit your city. The business tax and utility tax right on target. What is below our projection is the charge for service. That's mostly the development plan review. Not so much about the parks and recreation, because those are small, but because of the volume of permit reviews. Last year, we saw a drop. Fines and forfeiture, we saw a little bit increase, but starting in 2024, we saw a huge revenue stream from the parking, the school zone camera program. And I know we got a public comment earlier, but our goal for the program is for public safety and for school zone and the kids walking around. So the emphasis is not about revenues, it's about public safety. And hopefully people who got a warning or people who got the first ticket, they will change and really honor the kids walking around as well as their parents, because I don't want a vehicle driving 35 miles in front of kids. That's the goal of the program. And we are getting revenue from it. And on average, we're projecting in 2024 about $2 million from that program. So that adds to our revenue source. But again, the emphasis is public safety, pedestrian safety, and kid safety. The other miscellaneous, Kyle mentioned that, is due to interest earning from our investment with the state investment pool. It's really easy. Every day you look at how much money we have on hand, and if we don't need that for cash flow, just send it to the state, just a click away. And then when we need it for payroll, we'll get it back. So that's very, very easy to do. But again, we're taking advantage of the higher interest rate so that we don't need to go to the taxpayer and ask, but are we doing our job, taking advantage of what we have and what we are given. So that's the message. And again, we'll look at the revenue trends in the next section of our presentation. So any questions about that? Deputy Mayor. Oh, sorry.
The state investment pool that you mentioned, can we lose money with that in a different economic climate?
We will never lose money because the principles are guaranteed by the state. So we will lose interest earning, but we will never lose the principal, including our Wells Fargo bond portfolio. By council policy, we have to invest in a very conservative portfolio of tools. So we will never lose our principles.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
How is this the last other miscellaneous? How is that looking in 2024?
Again, I mentioned it's about $2 million from the safety school zone safety program.
No, the interest. The interest one. How was the last one? Right now, 8.2.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah,
no,
yeah.
okay, but...
we are in fact projecting to be stable for the next 2 years because the way that the state is investing, they are locking in the higher rates as we speak, because we know probably after or later in the year, the Fed already signaled that they will be lowering their rate. So I've been looking at our Wells Fargo portfolio as well. So we are locking in like rates. Even last week, we got into a 5.1% bond that is 2 years from now.
So in 2024, or even the next 2 years, we are going to see a big spike like this?
Not
Difference?
spike because we are
Not
going
spike,
to.
I mean, it's going to be 8 million over the next 2.5 years then?
From the interest earning, we're projecting about $6 million or so. But
It's not going to
again,
be this much, but it's going to be still higher.
still higher
So
than.
you're going to raise the blue bar, which is the projected, you're going to raise that for the future? Is that what's going to happen?
The blue bar is the budgeted amount. So in the 25 will be in
You'll
par.
be
And I don't remember the exact number of what the budget projection was for interest earnings, but
It's
it
about
was
$500,000.
quite low. Yeah, it was
Yeah.
about $500,000. So I think a lot, like, we can assume, well, not, I mean, that's easy math, I guess. I was gonna say about $1 million, but it's less than that.
Yeah.
Is the assumed, so there's some other things in there besides interest rates, but yeah, so the interest would be in that 6 to 7 million.
So 8 million is primarily driven by the interest earnings.
That's correct.
Over the next 2 years, then we will be, the projected will be 6 million, not 1.1 million?
That's
I
correct.
assume.
Or even
Plus or minus,
yeah,
whatever
yeah.
it is, the number is, yeah.
That's correct.
Okay, cool, thank you.
Just wanted to say well done on the increased interest. That's quite a lot of money extra. I'm curious, do we use that to offset the other items that didn't have as much revenue as we expected? And if there's money left over, do we use that for things like the Opportunity Fund we're going to talk about tonight, or are there other designated uses for the increased interest?
So the money, if we don't spend it, will go into the fund balance, which we'll be talking about. So the fund balance has been growing, but it depends. It's a policy choice, how much you want to spend now versus the future. Dollars that you spend today is $1 less available in the future. So that will be part of the discussion later on. So because anything that we don't spend, including our budget, will be adding to the fund balance. Or if we overspend a budget, that amount will be coming out of the fund balance.
I've been part of budget discussions when we were cutting things, and this is more fun, and this is the position that you hope you'll be in down the road when you are having those discussions. So it's kind of fun to see these things come full circle a couple budget cycles later. The projected versus accrued look shockingly close to me.
Yeah, it is.
But I've only been through, this is my third one of these. Like, is this normal or is this really, really close?
So we are going to project forward. So we are not going to second guess what happened in the past, because if you look at it from 2020 point of view, yeah, you can second guess, but in the future, we will be looking at like regression analysis, how close we are.
Yeah, no,
But,
I was just like, these, I'm
good.
asking you to brag, is what I'm doing. Like, let me be clear. Like, because it seems like it's something worth being very proud about, having the
Yes.
projections be that close, and like, I'm just confirming that that's the case.
Yeah, Ted is really our revenue person, so thank you, Ted.
I see you, Ted.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We did have earlier today in this very room, we recognized some anniversaries of employees of dates that had been accrued in the first half of the year. And I will say that Ted is, I won't say how long he's worked here, but it may be the equivalent of 10 budgets, biennial budgets. And so he does definitely know, he has some good instincts on what to predict.
Perfect, that's all I've got.
Okay, but I have to say, it's almost like my past experience. Opportunities bring challenges and vice versa. So challenges will also bring opportunities. So again, I don't know who I learned it from, but it's been my guiding principle, not just budget, but through life. So we do have some major challenges in front of us. So I'm not going to paint you a rosy picture, even though we are really on target to meet our budget and also things that we really need to invest. But there are really four budget considerations for us to really think about between now and December. We're not asking you for a decision today, but to give you a heads up. And when we come back the next many months, many sessions, we'll be talking to you more. But we are asking for your direction at a policy level. Should we go here or should we do something else? So the first one is safe streets and sidewalks. As you have been reminded, the levy expires. It's a 9-year levy. It expires in December 2025. So in 26, which is part of our biennial budget, we will have a gap of $5 million. So if we choose to renew it, that would be a choice. But if we do not renew it, there will be other choices. So at this time, we'll just let you be aware that we need to balance the 25-26 budget. So we'll bring back with options based on your direction this evening. Yes.
Are we going to talk more about safe streets and sidewalks later this evening?
Yes, in
then
our
I'll
third
wait.
presentation. And of course, we will have options as well. So increased cost, so that is no big news. When I go to Costco to fill up my gas tank, I can't believe it, I'm paying about $4 and above. So inflation is eating into our budget. So the major cost is, again, we have dedicated city staff here, and we want to give them the wage and benefit that they deserve. But they continue COLA. We negotiated a 5% cap, but based on the April CPI, the amount is about at 4.5%. So we are factoring into that calculation in our so-called base budget, because we're not going to ask you whether we should pay the 4.5%. It is in the base budget. So we have to keep the lights on and keep our people be at work and deliver our wonderful services and programs. The other one is insurance. It's not based on our past incidents or anything else, but it is the insurance that they are raising for everyone, no matter whether you had any claims. It is the story of the insurance. For the self insurance pool, we have to pay $2.3 million more in the next biennium. And that's not small potato. And also the healthcare cost, which is, again, under control, but still for the next biennium is about $750,000. So everything is going up, including the cost of my gas tank. So the third thing is, I think it's more fun for me personally and professionally. You gave us your 2040 vision about a year and a half ago, and you also identified your 3-year funding priorities. So as we work among the executive leadership team, your directors are already working hard on how to not just talk about any new requests, but how do we evaluate our base budget so that we can meet your guidance of delivering not just to the community of Bothell, but the future generations of Bothell. So we are taking your direction really at heart. And again, one of the things that you ask us to do, and again, is one of the options, is to talk about a potential parks levy. We don't have recommendation or asking you for a decision, but you told us that you want to see an option, and we are going to work hard to develop those options. And then because we are in a good financial situation, and then not worry about cuts, but how do you put away savings when you have it? I cannot come up with $1 if I do not have $1 of saving. So we'll be asking you on a policy level between now and December whether we need to update our reserve policy. as you remember, we have, by council direction, a 90-day reserve policy. 90 days is like we have to keep the lights on. We cannot dip below the 90-day reserve policy, and that's the general fund. Right now, it's almost at about $17 million sitting in fund balance, but that's keeping us at a 90-day of operating budget. Otherwise, we will have to close the door. But we are not at that. So, but then we also, by choice, added to the reserve a $3.5 million about 3-4 years ago due to the sale of a surplus property. And again, we have not touched that, nor have we increased that. So if you calculate $3.5 million 4 years ago, that ought to be updated. So we'll be asking you to see if the council wants to really revisit the policy and perhaps to increase the restricted reserve level for emergency purposes. Thank you.
I hate to ask this question because I know we're going to get to it. But are you saying that we have effectively not saved in any money except for that one-time bump that we got from selling the property?
We have not added into that fund
Okay,
or that restricted
that's
account.
good to know.
So I
Okay,
think,
thank you.
yeah, and in the agenda bill for the next topic, there is language around what do we have, what is in our bank account, but then also what we'll be specifically talking about is the council-directed policy of a restricted reserve. And with that, again, we'll touch on it more, but thinking of a restricted reserve of the council gives policy discretion around how do we operate. With a restricted reserve, we don't touch anything without explicit council direction. Those would be budget amendment conversations. So the question would be is, if we want to think of, instead of thinking of it as a flat dollar amount, do we want to think of it as a percentage, and then what percentage would that be? So we will have further conversations.
Yes.
Are you done with this, with your?
We
have a discussion.
Please.
Two topics. One is the DEI position and the human services position, and along that is the human service grants conversation. Are we going to have those at some point in the future, or?
Yeah, really quick. The DEI position is a budgeted full-time equivalent position in the budget going forward. So it will be assumed included in the next biennial budget in case council wants to
Because we
make a
used
different
ARPA
choice.
funds, and that's why I'm asking. 'Cause those
Not for the DEI position.
Okay.
So good question and a good clarification. We did use ARPA funds for the human services coordination position. Part of it was, and it is a term limited position. Part of the logic at the time of that was that we were also funding through council direction the human services needs assessment. And so what we scoped that position for was, what is the work that we need in order to help deliver that assessment and continue the work that had been initiated during the pandemic and during the previous biennium. Our assumption then is with the completion of that assessment, we'll have a better picture of what is the need going forward, what does the future look like, and we can then know what is the position, is there a position need, and what is that position need going forward. The human services coordinator position, I do believe, is also assumed to continue,
Yes.
as it is funded through ARPA, would be continuing through this next biennium. So we'll address that as well. The funding for human services needs itself, there is a human services needs committee, which I know you were on it. And so there will be continued conversations as the budget is developed with that committee that will feed into then the recommendation that comes forward to the council.
Yeah, I was talking about the grants, but I guess we'll talk about that in the fall after the needs assessment is done.
Correct, yeah, that's good, yes.
And the second topic. The second one is, I know we've been talking, and it just occurred to me, we didn't discuss we talk about revenues, but we didn't talk about expenses and their projections in this conversation. It would be good to look at the full context of, revenues and expenses at some point.
So We will definitely
Like
talk.
broken down by.
Yeah, we can
things.
come back with the
Yeah.
analysis. But again, we are not seeing anything in the red. We are projecting forward. So for 2024, we are okay. But 25, 26, again, we are still working on the budget with the challenges of inflation. So that's going to be
I know.
a challenge.
And we'll follow up with some more details about what we've seen in terms of the actuals, and also to help as we look forward to the next biennium, we'll be happy to bring a breakdown of more of the actuals too.
Because I know I'm talking about the future. I know you're talking about how do we expand the reserves and how do you start becoming more stable in the very far future. You have to start now, and we'll talk about it. It'd be good to have that context also when we want us to make the decision on the next topics we're going to be talking about. It'd be good to see,
Yes.
what are we going to be, like, here's the vision statement, here's the priorities for the next 3-4 years or whatever. Like, how are we gonna-
Correct.
like, they all go hand in hand. I know you tried to
Yes.
break it up. So,
Absolutely. I think, and as we've discussed too, that
Yeah.
we were chewing on the idea of some all-dayers for this, and so definitely you're getting the kind of the top line look. But we will continue to bring some more detail. It's a great feedback on what would be helpful.
And I think you may also be interested. We are not just looking at the general fund expenditures. We are looking at the operating fund. So I'm looking at the city as a big budget, including what we will be talking about is our capital plan. How are we going to spend our wise dollar but limited dollar on improving and keeping up with our infrastructure? So it's not just about the operating, like staffing costs. It's also our infrastructure costs that will be going up. Council member.
This might be too early, as everyone else has said with their questions. But the deputy mayor's question got me curious. As we've seen people wonderfully do their work with DEI coordination and human services coordination, have we found that one full-time staff member is enough? I know some of that the human services needs assessment will reveal, but like, is there funding for, like, is there maybe like some work that requires funding that's been identified through having people in those roles? Like, what does that look like?
So that is work that we're currently undergoing with the work of the ELT and the departments of looking at overall across the city. What are the needs? We're looking. I will share that one of the directions that we did receive from the finance department was let's assume a no growth budget of going forward, and then we are looking at what are some of the potential prioritized increases, and so we'll look at where that is, and based on needs in terms of what is the data information showing us of where the prioritization was. So that'll be part of the discussion in the fall. I don't anticipate the answer to being yes to anything you just asked, but we're undergoing that work right now.
That makes sense. The other thing I was going to ask is for the restricted reserve. I would love to know what other cities are doing, and as much as you would be comfortable saying it on camera, how that's working for them, just to see what everyone else is doing, so that we're not trying to build it from scratch either.
Yeah, thank you. We still have a lot of homework to do between now and December. So we will bring back those answers to you.
Let's look at between now and December.
And speaking about between now and December, so this is June. This is really the first of many study sessions that we have with you. So again, 25-26 budget considerations. We'll also be talking to you about the 25 to 2031 capital facility plan. Today is the overview because you are the capital facility committee. So we will be working with you, all of you, closely during the development process. And then in July, it's mostly about the CFP. So we'll give you the staff's latest work. We'll be going to the Parks and Recreation Board on, I think, July 11th. And then later on with the Planning Commission, just to touch base and say, this is where we're going, and we want to hear the feedback, if any, from them, and then bring back those comments to you as the CFP committee. And then I think the third week of July, we'll have a second of the study session focusing on the CFP. And again, we likely will have a more concrete list of projects to show you and get your feedback. Any questions about June and July? Okay. October and then August. I don't know what to do in August. So I'm going to get ready for October, November, and December. So in October, so we will, again, hopefully in middle of October, we will deliver to you our 25-26 preliminary budget. That would include the general fund budget and the non-general fund budget. So utilities that you will be hearing later today. And then the CFP, the formal CFP proposal. In November, we'll undergo many processes, including public hearings. We envision at least 2. And then council questions and revisions. So again, it is the first step. It's not done until you say it is done. And then property tax, we do have a November 30th deadline that we need to file with the county. So we need to get the property tax levies adopted. It will be your usual 1% because we are limited by state law. So you probably will ask us about any public engagement process. So we will be talking to you about that. But as you remember, a couple of weeks ago, we presented to you the findings of the community engagement or community budget survey. So that's also a document that we are relying on. So council adoption will be sometimes early in December. That will include the fee schedule, the utility rates, and the proposed budget and the CFP. The utility rates may come to you earlier because things that we need to submit to the other jurisdictions as well. And Boyd will talk about that in his work. So that's kind of the grand plan between now and December. I'm sure there will be, traffic lights in between that we will need to slow down, and we will slow down to hear your feedback. If we are heading the wrong direction. But our job is that we'll seek your feedback early so that we are not wasting time going to detours, but straight ahead to the December day. But again, if we need to slow down, we will slow down to hear your feedback and your direction.
Yeah, so for that, again, tonight, that's really the main overview. And then if we're ready, we can roll into the continued discussion. We've touched on a little bit, but of revenue options.
30 minutes. I have my hand.
Excellent.
It's like, before you move on too quick, please. So Director Kwan, thank you for all of this. I really appreciate the progress that we've seen on the budget. And my question for you is about the reserves. And could you just give us a brief overview of like what the reserve, the goal is for how long you want reserves to, the amount of time you want in reserve for the operating budget and how close we are to that? I think some of those specifics would be helpful to me. And maybe I'm a little early in asking this question, and we're going to have more of these questions answered in detail later. But I do remember our previous conversations about the reserve fund and wanting to prevent us from running out of it. But I'm also wondering if we're at a place where we can begin to grow it.
That's great questions. We'll be exactly talking about that in the next presentation. So if you could wait a little bit, we will be addressing your questions. Oh, thank you.
It was a perfect transition.
Perfect transition. So in the next section, Andrew and I will, do a brief presentation, but really leave plenty of time for you to ask questions like those about. So what about the our reserve fund? What is it, and how are we going to manage it? So we'll be talking to you about those policy choices. So revenue options will give you kind of. So for today, we'll update the council on the city's major revenue sources and potential revenue opportunities, and review a potential policy choice of creating a restricted reserve for the long-term budget stabilization. So current revenue sources, we really have 4 major sources. And as I mentioned, in 23-24, we got 2 surprises. But basically, the city of Bothell has property tax, sales tax, utility tax, and charges for service. We really don't have that many other significant sources. We can talk about other potentials, but we need to talk about if they will bring in significant amount that will address any needs that we have. Because the more tax that you impose on the community, people may be a little bit confused about what our direction is. So usually my advice is focus on the big picture, and within that, we have options for you to consider. So property tax, that is the yellow line, is this line. We are really flat, and we are only limited by the 1% and new construction. We are not observing any new trends going forward. So that is a very stable source. And luckily, and again, we are still watching our receipts from the REITs. So far, we're doing pretty well. Our community is growing, and we do have a large property tax base. The major one is, let's see if I can point this. The red button. Ooh, college.
Maybe you want the mouse.
Okay, the red line is your sales tax. And again, since 2020, we have seen the change of behavior, not necessarily a growth in our sales tax, but a change in behavior. And that has sustained itself since the pandemic and stay-at-home, 3 years of stay-at-home. In our budget projection that will be coming to you, we are going to run some regression analysis to see how closely we are with what we are seeing in the economy, but we are relying on the Puget Sound forecaster, a research group that is based in a university. We are relying on their forecast, and they are projecting growth in 25 and 26. So they are not seeing a slowdown.
Actually, this is like remember when we talked about it during like 2 or 3 years ago, and 3 years ago, and you were very cautiously optimistic. The flat line between 2021 and now, I mean, it's a good thing. That means the trend that people are actually indeed shopping more from home.
Yeah,
I guess. So because we did talk about how do we increase the online shopping, as a city, like how do we incentivize that in the city, So that's a good thing.
yeah.
I just wanted to add, because I'm one of those people that during the epidemic kept Amazon very, very busy. And I was thinking, and I think that was about the same time that on a federal level, they started charging sales tax for any whether a business was in state or out of state.
Yeah, the change was to the source of delivery.
Yeah, which was great. But as I'm sitting there looking at sales tax, I appreciate that, because that's mostly probably discretionary money that people are using. I mean, utilities are you gotta turn on the water and that sort of thing. But there's, by the same token, love internet spending, but want to keep our brick and mortar businesses going too. So, what's that balance of encouraging our local businesses where people feel content in Bothell I can get it in Bothell, and if I can't, then go ahead and go on the internet.
I agree, but I think that will be a decision we will make also from a policy and zoning perspective that will enable that. That'll be cool.
Okay. So sales tax, even though it's our biggest one, and according to the projection for 2024, we are getting about $18 million. Having said that, that is only 24% of our total general fund revenue. So that's not. Point well taken. Okay, the two other so-called stable sources are your utility tax and charges for service. Charges for service, we are still working with the Community Development Department to look at their permit volume. So we'll be updating that forecast based on whatever that they're seeing, because that is going to be a driver of plan reviews. And we'll be updating the fee schedule for the other departments at the end of the year. Other departments that we're working with is Parks and Recreation and your other charges as well. So the two so-called surprise ones are the fines and interest earnings. I mentioned briefly in my last presentation to the school zone safety camera program. We are bringing, so again, talking about behavioral change, the amount of revenue from those fines is about $2 million. We're not seeing a growth from that because we believe once people learn their lesson, we hope that is the behavioral change, that they do not drive over 35 miles an hour in a school zone. So we are not projecting a lot from that revenue source.
And before we go to the next slide too, I think one of the things to be thinking about is as we, again, there's a flow to tonight of the topics, and so we will be talking about the safe streets and sidewalks. As we think about that, the increase that Kwan mentioned in terms of fines, again, because we want to see a behavior change, we want that line to dip down. And so as we think about how you would program that cost, the things that are stable, that we see steady and growing, those are great opportunities for how do we fund ongoing programs. For the things that we want to see volatility, like the amount of fine, we want to think about project-specific work that is one-time in funding, and once it's funded, we can do it, as opposed to counting on having it stay the same for over years. So some of this information, again, will help set up for the next conversation as well.
Thank you. And then the next topic is the interest earning. I mentioned briefly a moment ago, it's about $6 million we are projecting. We don't see a significant dip in the next 2 years. More than that, we are not projecting at this point. So we will learn more about what the Fed is doing or not doing, and then what happens next year after the election. So we'll be learning more about the interest environment and the changes in our investment portfolio. But again, I mentioned we are investing in a very conservative and safe portfolio. We just the state, so our risk is minimal. Yes.
Are the budget stabilization fund, is that kind of an investment portfolio right now? Is that helping with those?
Yes. So the amount that we're not spending or we're not having to pay bill, they are in the fund balance or cash in the bank and also in the state investment. So if we set aside whatever amount in the future by council policy, that amount will just sit in the state pool. So because we're not spending it, so the amount will be in the state pool.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. Any questions about that? Okay,
One more question on the fines. Obviously, we saw a pretty big decrease right away once people started realizing that we were enforcing that law. Are projections made on that continuing to go down, or has it kind of leveled off?
So we only have 2 quarters of data, and so there was a slight decrease in the hundreds of infractions from quarter 1 to quarter 2 of the program. As we look at projections for something like that, we're not only going to look at we'll only have 2 data points, but we'll also look at what are other agencies what are other cities in our region experiencing? What is some of the drop-offs? What can we expect? And also working with our vendor on that. So I think there's some more data that we can draw in, especially as we're early in the program, to look at that. It's a good question.
Yeah.
And I really just appreciate the way that you guys called out that revenue source. Like I would love to take that money and spend it so that we don't need that program any longer. So I really like the idea of investing that right back in the corridor where it came from, so we can have the safety.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Okay, so we talk about the revenue sources that we have. So I'm going to introduce a couple of new things that we have not exercised. Those are not new per se. So the next 2 topics will be what are we going to do with what we have before we invest or explore other options. And again, based on your feedback, you may have other ideas, and we're ready to do the homework for you. So tonight, we're going to talk about the Transportation Benefit District, and then later on, we'll be talking about this Safe Street and Levy, and we'll talk more about these 2 options in the context of transportation infrastructure improvements and safety. So in 2015, the City of Bothell Council formed a TBD to potentially fund transportation infrastructure. So the council already exercised that to date, but we have not utilized this option to impose a sales tax related to the TBD. Other jurisdictions have done that, but we have not done it yet. So basically, there are really 2 components within the TBD Transportation Benefit District. The first is a sales tax, and then the second one is the vehicle license fee, or what we call the TAP. So going back to the sales tax, there are 2 options. One is the council can exercise it on its own without going to the voters. The second option is to have a voter-approved tax. So the first option, if we decide to choose that option, we are limited to a 0.1% sales on the retail. And based on our very preliminary projection, that would generate about $1.8 million a year. And you can last that for the next 10 years with no extension except to pay for your debt service. The second one, you need to go before the voters, and that is a 0.3% option on the TBD. And that would generate a significant more, in the tune of $5.3 million. So for your information, those could only be spent on transportation projects and safety projects. The City Council declared the entire city of Bothell as a transportation benefit district. So the amount that you collect can be spent on every corner of the city, benefiting not just a particular neighborhood or district, but for the whole city. So you'll keep that in mind. Any questions before I go to the car tap?
Is this where you want some feedback?
Yes, you can.
On this particular item?
Yeah, general feedback.
Okay. I know we're not making a decision on this now, but I'm going to weigh in with an opinion, and so people can start thinking about counterpoints on it. I hesitate the vehicle license fee. The rate of buying new cars is, I don't want to say historically low, but very low right now. People are making their vehicles last longer because they're on tighter budgets. So I hate to hit people who need their cars for life with a $50 fee. That's voter approved, right, which is great. Sales tax at first blush seems like it would impact anybody who's going through Bothell on our streets and spending money, which is more appealing to me. But if we also want to go for a higher rate on it, we would have to have a voter approval as well, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so then the other question is, it's dedicated towards transportation is related. Is that anything transportation? Like, could we do road maintenance, or is it all new construction? Or, I mean, is it very restrictive in the transportation application, or is it broader?
Yeah, thank you for the question. But I will let our Public Works Director to talk about that in her presentation. We're not just coming up with, just spend money that we collect, but we will need to identify what are the projects, what are the either maintenance or preservation.
Okay.
Because you can spend on so-called preservation of the infrastructure. So you can
This tax would do that.
You can do maintenance. But again, I will let the Public Works Director to
All right.
speak on
Thank you.
that.
We're definitely, this is like a deck of cards tonight of where the topics really aren't overlapping. But if we, if we only had one slide deck, it would really, when would we take breaks? So, but they're good questions to get on the table, and it will help inform presentation points here to come.
Yeah, so let me go to the license tab and answer perhaps a question that has been raised. So for the license tab, council may consider a $20 fee per vehicle. So any registered vehicle within the city of Bothell will be paying that tab. But this is not on new vehicles. This is on your annual renewal of your vehicle. So as soon as you own a car, you will need to pay that tab. So we're just taking on $20. We cannot go to a $40 without without exercising the $20 fee in the first 2 years. And then we are projecting $1.4 million if you exercise the $40 after the first 24 months. And the big one is really asking the voter if they want to approve a car tab up to $50 a year. But that would be a voter approval. But so consider between the two, sales tax and license fee, the sales tax will definitely bring you more in terms of revenue on an annual basis. But there are choices to be made.
And this is where the question I had about, like, what are we going to be spending? Because, in the previous slide, we talked about how sales tax wasn't that great. Oh, it's the highest value, but it's only 24%. Adding, round up 2 million without the voter approval, and then adding, so 2 million, it's like 3.5 million, let's be generous. I mean, how much can get done with 3.5 million? Because the flip side of this, to Councilmember Zorns' point, is you want to impose some hardship on the residents of Bothell. Like, what's the, what are the cost-benefit analysis for doing this?
So putting it into context, as we do go into the Safe Streets conversation, and where we will revisit these two concepts, is that I believe that the Safe Streets levy currently is bringing totaling around $5 million a year. So when we put it into that sort of context, you think about right now we have a means of asking the community to invest in operations and some improvements, and that brings in $5 million a year. So there could be the conversation of what the next conversation will really start bringing this into focus of. One option the council can consider is that we don't want to do anything that's a new revenue. We want to continue with what we're doing. We could ask the voters to continue at the current rate or a higher rate, and what would those options do? We could also look at a combination of these factors. So, but if we think about what might be easiest to hold on to is thinking about, well, right now what we are doing with that program is about $5 million a year. And so as you look at the dials that you want to turn, do we want to get to 5 million? Do we want to be below 5 million? Do we want to be above 5 million? And then what are the things that council would want to do with that money? So I think, again, right now what we want to do is introduce the concept of this, and then we'll apply it in the next conversation. And it may be that the council wants to know more, and we continue working on it, or we may get direction of saying we're not interested in this option, but bring us back more information about these other two.
I appreciate the clarification. The levy's coming up for renewal, we need to decide whether to renew or not, because it brings in a certain amount, and this is options to replace that amount or be on top of the amount. So
Yes.
I get it. The angle I'm coming at is from a resident perspective. What am I going to pay more on,
Right.
So like, am I going to pay more on property tax levy, or am I going to pay more using a sales tax plus a vehicle tax or a tab
Yes.
fee, or, this is the question that I have from a resident perspective.
And that's exactly what we're looking for, the direction from council is, as you are representing the community, of what's the combination that again, of value for dollar. And that's where, Kwan mentioned the resident survey of one of the things we do ask is, do you feel like you're getting the value for your tax dollar? And we want to hit that right mark. And so having feedback through what you hear from the community is really helpful as we tune up what the right combination of a package is.
Yes.
I was going to say, I don't know that I'm for this in addition to the Safe Streets and Sidewalks levy, so the amount of expected revenue is going to be really important. But I am really interested in the TBD sales tax option, not really the licensing fee. I think the city manager mentioned a few weeks ago, you do have people who creatively register their vehicles out of the Sound Transit ST3 service area. So, yeah, well, you brag about it on the internet. It's either true or you're bragging about a weird thing. But I like the idea of a sales tax because it means people who are doing things in Bothell and using our transportation system are paying the tax. Whether you live here, you work here, you're visiting because we're really cool, whatever it is, instead of just you live here, you're paying for it. And that seems like a better way to share the cost of providing the infrastructure for all the cool stuff we do here. So that's kind of where I'm going, but it does really depend on, I would love, whether it's a survey or some kind of look into like, is this palatable either at the 0.1% or the 0.3% with a voter approved tax? Like, I don't want to put it out there, have it fail, and then we just don't have any way to continue like building safe routes to school and, buffing up our infrastructure and affording just the maintenance on what we have. Because it's great that things aren't dire with our budget, but like we can't also say, and I want something right there. Like we're not at the point where we can just spend freely either. So as we balance it out, I would love a different way to share the cost amongst who's using the system, but it also still has to be able to work.
Great feedback.
A sales tax is also regressive because it doesn't affect the whole community the same way. If somebody is richer, it'll be a smaller percentage of their income versus somebody who is not as wealthy. It'll be a larger percentage of their income. So these are considerations. That's what I'm talking about from a resident perspective.
I think all our options are regressive at this point, though.
Yeah.
A levy does not affect renters, for example.
Well, if you own
Directly.
property and the tax goes up, that's going to affect what you charge for
Maybe
rent.
that's why I'm saying
None of them are perfect.
Nothing is perfect.
And that's why we have this conversation early, because part of the plan is really to bring you all of the options for you to consider strategically and also comprehensively. We will talk about the utility rates later on tonight and into the future. Utility rates are also impacting our community. So if you take everything as a package, where do you want to make the choices? So right now, we're talking about policy level, but at the end of the budget process, we will have tough choices.
Yep.
Mayor.
The way I see this, like, we're not looking to commit to anything or take anything off the table tonight. We're basically this is you bringing back the options that you think are the most realistic for us with specifics around revenue, so we can be well informed as we continue in these discussions. Right? Perfect. Because like the deputy mayor said, anytime somebody says, what about this revenue? My next question is always, to do what? And we haven't had that conversation yet.
Yep.
So, Councilmember Aldrichs?
And that is also my question. I think it's good to be informed and aware of what options are available and for your guidance in these options. But like my colleagues, I would like to see sort of the, okay, and if we do this, what do we get, or what can we do with it? Before I'd be comfortable with like saying, yeah, I want to move forward with that one. So I guess to me, it sort of like taxes are always a investment in the public good. It's us pulling our money together so that we can have good, services and amenities and be safe and happy and healthy in our the places that we live. And so, and that's very abstract and high level. I would just like it to be more concrete. So like, what can we get from this? How do we benefit? Where could we apply these investments so that we are benefiting our community, and even, like not just benefiting, but I'm going to use a phrase that I know has a technical term, but what's the highest and best use of these funds if we were to make these investments? And so I would want to understand more along those lines, before saying like what I would be willing to support. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for the feedback.
Not 100% related, but I thought of it while we were looking at this. So when you renew your tabs, I think it's a $5 optional donation to state parks. Can we ever just say, what about $5 to city parks? Like, do we get to pick, is it only the okay.
That's
I had to try. We got to build that part.
You are having legislative agenda conversations soon, though, so you can always ask for a change.
We're at the point where it's a lot of ideas, and we got to weed out the ones that aren't good. So we'll see.
all right. And then the other option before you will be a potential voter-approved parks levy. So again, bring it to you as an early consideration. We will be coming back with homework. But what we have taken off per your direction from the 3-year priority plan is really to develop the pros plan before we go to ask the voters what they want to pay for. So that's our commitment to you. We'll bring back in our 2025 budget a proposal that we are still developing and asking for your direction. If we want to consider a parks levy, we want to do our homework first before going to the voters. As you remember, the pros plan is required by other jurisdictions, and it's a 6-year. But we really don't need to do it until 2026. We are not recommending to delay it until 26 to go ahead with the pros plan. So the earlier we get, because it's going to be a very community-involved process. So I think Nick will say that this is what our plan is, to go to do our homework early and talk to the community often, and then come back to you and asking for direction before we ask the voter what are they willing to pay for. But keep that in mind as well, because you are going to be asked to say to consider the Safe Street renewal and other options. So just put that into context.
Just to contextualize to what we've just heard in the conversation is what I think the council will be aware, but for anybody who's watching too, what the pros plan does is gives us the package of exactly what would we be doing with the funding. So it helps us go out with the conversation of here's what we're asking for and here's what we'll deliver. So again, putting it into the context of that, that's why this is all part of the council priorities. And while we are in the biennial budget, I guess the bottom line of what Kwana is saying here is that we can move forward with the biennial budget and not include this at the beginning. And when in the mid-biennium, when the time is appropriate, we can come back and adjust. So we'll do the work in 25 and have another interesting conversation.
Just a clarification question. This is say, does this mean we're going to have a conversation? Are we planning in the budget for a levy? Or no? That's the question that I have.
No. So as we move towards adoption of the 25-26 budget, it would not include.
So it's just for
yeah.
a pros plan update.
Correct. We're committed to the pros plan update. That'll be funded in the budget. What happens next will then be further conversation, as the director mentioned, quite a bit of community engagement, which will then inform a recommendation to the council. The Parks Board will also be Parks and Recreation Board will be highly informed and involved, and will come with a recommendation of what the council might take to the community and get their feedback on through the ballot.
Thank you.
Yeah, because I think a couple of you already asked, so what are we paying for? So we want to answer that question for you.
I think both council and the city at large are very eager to have that conversation about parks.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to us diving into that soon.
I just needed to say, Nick, can you believe it's already time to do another pros plan? Like, I feel like I've been here a long time, because like I was working on that back when I was on the Parks Board, and here we are, and it's time to do it all over again.
Okay, the next topic is on the restricted reserve. So again, this is just the beginning of a conversation. I know we are in the process of really looking at what other jurisdictions are doing as well. We are asking ourselves whether or not the budget itself is sustainable before we even talk about expenditures or even put money aside. But so today we're just asking for your feedback at the policy level. And we're not talking about how much, how soon, but we will answer that question about what is a reasonable time frame, what is the reasonable amount based on the comparison with other jurisdictions, and also based on what Bothell is doing. Other jurisdictions may have higher reserve or a lower cash flow. We don't need to be like them. We want to be Bothell. But I also want you to be aware that during the good economic time, it is the opportunity and also the challenge to put saving aside, so that when we, as you instructed us to do, we need to do a longer term, more stable budget, because I don't want to have a balanced budget and then come back to you for the next biennium. Oops, we need to do certain cuts. So that's the goal. At the policy level, so right now we have a 90-day reserve, and that's about $17 million of operating. So right now we have about, so the 90-day equals to $17.2 million, and that's about 24% of our general fund. So that money is sitting in the state pool or the Wells Fargo portfolio, earning interest. So it is working for us. But on top of that, by your instruction, we cannot dip below the 90-day. So that means we have to start planning for cuts if, again, any uncertain events are coming to Bothell, and we have no additional buffer to absorb that shock. So the whole idea of a restricted reserve is to manage those risks. And I'm asking you to consider, again, as a city, whether we should have a larger cushion to absorb and manage those risks. And you have already begun doing that. And that's by setting aside the $3.5 million from the sales of the surplus property. So again, thank you for that decision. So it's sitting there since 2021, and it's approximately 5% of our general fund. So what I'm asking the council and also my peers to consider is to keep the 90-day, to keep the $3.5 million, but as at the policy level, should we consider a higher level, whatever the percentage is, to absorb additional risk and for us to manage those risks?
And I'll interject. While we are not asking for a specific percentage, so you don't have to start throwing out numbers for us today. But again, as we move forward, the deputy mayor knows the right number. But as we move forward in the budget development process, really the question for today is around, is there an openness to, again, first think of that budget stabilization fund, converting that to a percentage, knowing that, again, there will be a day where $3.5 million doesn't sound as much as it is to us today in our ears. But then also, is there an interest in potentially looking at scenarios for higher percentages than, if you do want to go to a percentage, that's the first question. Would you want to see some scenarios of what it looks like at a higher level? And then we will do the research. And in the agenda bill, there is some comparisons that we've received through Moody's feedback from our bond ratings, but we'll do additional feedback. And Councilmember Dodd, I appreciated the question of also not just looking at what the numbers say, but also what are we hearing from our peers of what has been the effect for them in terms of pros, cons of what it does in limitations or benefits. So I think that's great homework that we would do. But again, if there's not an interest, then we'll save the time and we won't do that.
Thank you.
Can I leap in with an opinion? And this is the time to have an opinion. My husband would be like, I can't believe that's coming out of her mouth. The 90-day reserve, I have questioned before on, can we make that heftier? And I don't know about you guys, but let's say there's a crisis when we're all long off the dais. I don't want that sitting council to look back and call us bad names because we were poor planners. They won't probably remember who we were, but they'll remember that bad decisions were made. I found it wasn't highlighted, but in the agenda packet, there's a statement that says that Bothell has the lowest fund balance as a percentage of expenses and days of cash on hand compared to peer cities. And that scared the crap out of me seeing that. And so, yes, on the BSF, I do want to have that conversation. And I like the idea of spreading it out over time, but not a long period of time. Choosing a reasonable, attainable, smaller window, excuse me, to get caught up on that would be great.
Can I ask a question? So it's more why are we the way we are, but I guess none of us, or very few of us, can answer that question since we're mostly new. So the question is, how can we then, the scenarios will be really helpful to evaluate, because that affects going back to the expenditures question, like, right? Because if you want to have a 90-day fund or 120-day fund, whatever it is, with a higher percentage, you want to know what you're spending so that, like, what's an emergency expenditure, right? So it'll be good to see the scenarios for me.
Councilmember Aldrich?
Thank you, Mayor. I know that in the nonprofit space, it is customary to have a reserve fund of 6 months. And I don't know if that's common among cities, but sometimes, financial principles translate into other fields. And so I would be curious, like, are there cities in the area that have 6 months, and how do we get a comparison between our current reserve practices and other cities' reserve practices?
Good question. We'll coming back with, again, those analysis. We did some homework, but that's based on 2022 data, so we need to update that.
And then can you comment on the 6-month reserve policy? Is that customary in cities?
I have heard there are other cities that would consider a percentage. So again, we need to do more homework, whether they are based on the number of months. So ours is based on 90 days. So that's about 3 months. So whether you want to increase it or you do a percentage. So those will be choices that will be coming back to run different scenario.
And I think while not called out in this conversation, there could be also something council might want to consider is if you don't want to distinguish between the two. So as a really good point of that, for instead of a 90-day reserve, if you want to look at a total percentage and create a total percentage reserve, there are things we can do. But again, we recognize, I think in some ways this is a good food for thought moment of seeding the discussion, because you could also say that what our policy is, as well as the director mentioned, we want to be Bothell. And so if this has served us well and we've found a way to manage through ups and downs, but we want to be at that point in time where we don't want to increase that, or we want to be modest in it, then knowing the tolerance of what we should be looking for. But if there's a range of options, or I appreciated the feedback of, let's potentially consider how do we build up over time, as opposed to saying in 2025 we're actually going to cut expenditures so that we can build our revenue, our reserve. Knowing some of those will help us know what our homework looks like. So right now what we're doing is we're establishing what's the assignment, and the assignment could be do nothing. But if there is an interest, like knowing some of the different interests will help us to narrow it down. So we're asking a modest number of questions of our peers instead of a lot of what ifs. So that's very helpful tonight.
I see that you are looking up at me.
I wanted to make sure. Oh, yeah. Okay, good.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. So this council has survived a pandemic together, and we have also rewritten the emergency code for the city, and we learned that a pandemic is not an emergency for the city, according to emergency code. But we did have a bit of a financial crisis. And so I guess I'd like to better understand what would constitute a emergency, like a financial emergency where we would need to use our reserves, because we haven't experienced that. And that's a good problem to have, not having experience with something awful. But I'm wondering if you could explain to us and to the community what might precipitate us needing to use those reserve funds.
So we will again look at legislations because right now we do have language in the $3.5 million budget stabilization fund limiting our ability to spend that money. And then by council choice, you can spend the money per the policy instructed in the legislation. I believe we need to beef that up. So you ask about examples. Again, the pandemic was unique, and I hope we will never see it again. But we also know emergencies will come. It's a matter of when. So again, natural disasters, earthquake, storms. So those are your obvious choices. Like in the event of a state or a local declared emergency, you can tap into the funding source. I have also seen economic emergencies. So instead of laying off, like in my past many jobs, your staff level, we could also by choice, according to council policy, that we could use some of the emergency fund to absorb those shocks. So again, many definitions that we will be coming back to you, and you may have ideas that we want to consider in that package. So again, we are doing the homework. If instructed, if you are interested in exploring this option. But economic crisis, that was tough on many of my prior staff. So again, how to manage those risks while we can taper off those curves. Even in business cycle, we have curves, and how do we taper those off?
And I think the one thing that I would interject too on that is that when we think about then trying to smooth out those dips, when we look at the city budget, and I know that you do, you've asked me lots of great questions over the couple of years, we don't have a lot of discretionary work that we do at the city. And so, in our personal budgets, when we have ups and downs, you do look at what are our subscriptions, and maybe that sales tax, internet sales tax does drop from our household. But we can make those choices. When we look at the city, there are not very many. And for the ones that you could consider potentially discretionary, I mean, I think Bothell, we do have some case studies of this as well, but when you look at what some of those are, they are not discretionary in that there's no value. In fact, many of the things that you could argue are the choices of where it isn't life and safety of, again, we're going to always treat our water, that sort of thing. When you eliminate them, you're really then setting back progress for years to come, and it becomes harder and harder to dig out of that. So that the perspective too of why I'm sure that there would be some people that would be listening to that and saying like, as a taxpayer, I am sympathetic to the idea of layoffs, and I'm also sympathetic to my budget. And that is that's feedback that we want to hear and that is helpful. When we think about it, there's the operating of the services that we provide to the community and the services that the community says that they want. I hope that we don't offer too many things that nobody wants. I don't see that. The reality is that a cutback today, it becomes more expensive, costly, and time delay of building it back into the future. So where that rate stabilization in terms of economic crisis also really helps us out of being able to weather the storm of, if it's something that's going to be a 1 or 2 year impact, we can make some adjustments. We can make policy choices about how we are going to slow down spending without making dramatic cuts as well. So it just keeps options open.
Just in general, over my time on council, we've had to catch up on our reserves because we really needed to at one point in time. And that's something that I'm really proud of our councils for doing over the last 5 years. I mean, I remember early 2020 when we laid off, I think, 14 staff members. And that's just a lot of institutional knowledge that is gone that we cannot get back. And also, I think if we bump this up so we are ready for emergencies, I think it makes us look like a more desirable employer. And I think I really liked what Councilmember Zorn said. In 2020, it would have been really nice if the councils over the prior 10 years had invested in an adequate reserve fund, so we could have just said, let's hang out for a little while. And we would have hung out for a little while, and then ARPA and everything came, and we could have kept those people, and they wouldn't have had to lose their jobs. So I'm in favor of it. It's definitely a eat your vegetables kind of thing. There's nothing we can build and point toward and say, see, look at this new cool thing that when we did that. But I also would like to see us bump this up a little bit. The other piece is just if our bond rating is higher, then we save money in other places. So like there's benefits that go beyond just stabilization and making it a desirable place to work and doing the right thing for councils to come. So yes, I would like to bump this up, especially when we have a surplus sitting in the general fund. And it's not something that we have to pull out of something else. I like that.
Question for you. Do we have the city equivalent of business interruption insurance? I don't know what you call it, revenue interruption insurance or something like that. Does something like that exist?
I don't think so.
Okay. Then I think it's even more important that we do invest in this. Like the mayor, I remember watching when the reserves were down around 60 days, and there were several forecasts of doom and gloom and how are we ever going to catch up. It was not a pleasant time, I'm sure, to be on council. It was not a pleasant time to watch as a resident. So I think what emergency funds do is they give you time and they give you options. And when things are bad, the more time and the more options you have, the better decisions you're going to make. You don't want to make decisions quickly with few options because it's not a good thing to be in. So I am supportive of increasing it. I'd love to see what you come back with. Okay. I don't know what the right number is, but going up will give us what we need. And when you think about the number of bad things that can happen, the odds are not likely that they're going to occur for an individual, but when you lump them all together, the odds that one of them will occur is much, much higher. So we don't know what it's going to be. Nobody foresaw the pandemic. Nobody foresaw many of the things that have happened in the past. And as humans, we like to say that we think we can predict the future, and we cannot. So this can only mean good things. And I think what we'd be giving up to do it is worth it. And future councils and our residents will be for it when the time occurs and we need to actually use it.
I agree 100%. I just want to caveat, like, we don't know what we're going to be spending on, what we need as service, what services do we need to provide the city as the city grows. So there's an opportunity cost for everything, right, as you know. So I think this is where the scenario and, analysis will be helpful as well.
And again, thank you for saying that, because investing in the infrastructure in order to do the things that the community desires to do is also important, because the longer you delay, the cost of inflation will eat into your project and your staffing cost. So again, policy choices before you.
I really appreciate this. I don't think any of us would have sought out this work had we not had like one thing in our heads, like, I wouldn't have done it that way. But I can't imagine anyone's going to come down in the future and say, ugh, they saved too much money. We're too prepared. So I like that. I like what the mayor said about if we improve our rating, we can save money in other ways. 90 days seems like a very short amount of time, but at the same time, it's a lot of money. So I look forward to just saving more and not having such hard choices as close to an event that might happen. I keep thinking of the SimCity 2000 disasters that you can pick from, like the giant monster, and I'm picking the one that's pretty unlikely. But yeah, I don't see a downside here. I do want to ramp up slowly so that we're not like nothing fun until we save up enough, because that's terrible. That's, but also the things that we are required to do for our city are so numerous, and the fun things come after that. And I feel like there's been a lot of times that we've had to regretfully cut a lot of the fun things, or even things that were necessary for some people, but that weren't statutorily required. So I like the idea of just not having that be such a tough, awful decision if we can avoid it in the future. So this is great.
I think I'd just echo everything else that's been said, but I'd also encourage us to not look at it at a 90-day, like it's not a day. We're not on a timeline here, right? It's a percentage of the budget. And so we need to reflect that, because our budget is going to change. And if we do encounter an emergency, the meteor strike, Godzilla, whatever, we're not going to look at it and be like, well, we have 90 days. We're going to look at it like, well, we have a 5% budget of our budget in storage, right? So we have to scale down our services. We have to like figure out how we're going to survive off of the 5%. We're not going to survive off of a 90-day timeline. So I think that moving away from the timeline and moving more towards the percentage would be more helpful for discussion.
Okay.
Well, that's an interesting idea. The percentage is probably driven by, if we say it's a 90-day, driven by what our budget is currently over time. It's going to change as well, right?
Yeah, because our budget will grow.
Right, okay.
Yeah, I think it's two ways of getting at the same thing, but I do think, like, again, as we storytell, and maybe even both, of how do we have an understanding of things. But you're absolutely right. It's the scenario of us having zero revenue coming in and then having to spend like out of a savings account to then replenish. It's kind of, how do we paint the picture of what the analogy is, and so we can be thinking about it, especially as we bring it back, if we want to look at it from a 90-day plus an additive of, again, that was what we're trying to display here, is that we get to 29%. So what is a healthy total, and then how we capture it in terms of what council policy direction gives us in terms of when do we tap into the base, and then do we have one that's a little more discretionary, and what are the scenarios? We can think of it that way too, and present options.
So I think you gave us a lot of feedback, and we will run from.
Thank you so much. You guys want to take a short break before we move on? All right, 15 minutes. It is 8:09. So we will see you, we'll just call it 16 minutes, and we'll call it 8:25. All right, welcome back, everyone. We are on air, good. We are jumping back into our next study session, which is the Safe Streets and Sidewalks, Levy Renewal, and Transportation Benefit District.
Thank you, Mayor. And as we continue to build on the themes, now we are going to shift into where we start applying some of the revenue conversations that we've had. Again, this will also continue to build into when we have a CFP conversation. So there is some overlap from your packet, but hopefully it's helpful as we keep applying these concepts. But with that, I am going to turn things over to the Public Works Director, who I will note has an army behind her of people ready to answer questions. So I think we're in good hands tonight.
Thank you, City Manager. Good evening, Mayor and Council. It's so nice to see you. So some of this conversation may seem very familiar to like 2 weeks ago, but we're going to make it relevant for this evening's conversation. So overview, transportation funding history, a little bit more than what Kwan and Kyle shared. Talk more detail about the Safe Streets and Sidewalks Levy through its life thus far. Talk about funding needs beyond 2025, and then posing some policy questions for you all. So, as prior colleagues mentioned, the council formed a transportation benefit district in April of 2015. Before that, funding for transportation purposes was eliminated for various reasons. So the city used to receive motor vehicle excise tax, and also used to receive funding specifically for streetlights. So those were both eliminated, I believe, in the early 2000s. So from 2013 till roughly 2016, council was having many conversations about how do we fill the hole that was left by those eliminated revenues. And then in June of 2016, council adopted the ordinance to authorize a November 2016 vote for the 9-year Safe Streets and Sidewalks levy. Just a little more detail about the levy itself. So as we all know, 9-year duration. It started out as 50 cents per 1,000 assessed value in 2017. The anticipated 9-year revenue is about $46 million when all is said and done. The levy goals were to fund street maintenance and operations, including in-house asphalt patching and sidewalk repair and replacement. Also talked about resurface, restore, replace arterial streets to attain an average pavement condition index rating of 80 for arterials by 2025. And this was in combination with the existing funding that the city set aside for that purpose and grants. And the reason for the 80 PCI is that's sort of our sweet spot when it comes to maintenance. So if we have that pavement condition rating, then it doesn't cost us as much to keep that as it does, because we can do things like slurry seal and crack seal, which you've likely seen these various years, because we have employed a lot of those measures over the past 7 years. We also, one of our goals was to install an average of 1/4 mile of high priority walkway projects, and including ADA ramps per year. And we really wanted to focus on safe routes to schools. So the city, and I've mentioned this before also, recruited a Safe School Walk Routes Task Force comprised of volunteers to represent the various K-12 schools in the area. And also we had a couple representatives from the North Shore School District on that. And that task force went through and determined a mechanism to prioritize projects and also identify the projects that they needed for all of Bothell area schools. So, and in the end, part of the report was not just their method, but also a prioritized list of projects. And also, one of the other things that came out of that report were some high priority crosswalks for the schools. And that was another goal, was to install and improve the city's crosswalks. And then the annual accountability report, which we just talked about a few weeks ago. So the planned distribution for the funds from the levy was 49% operations, 41% pavement preservation, 8% sidewalks, and 3% crosswalks. And although spending on the various programs varies from year to year, this pie shows that for the 7-year period thus far, we've tracked pretty close to what our goal was as far as that spending. Some of the successes that we've seen on the maintenance and operations side, we've been able to keep up with maintenance needs, I would say pretty handily. And we've also have a very successful sidewalk repair and replacement program and local street asphalt repair program. Really proud of the team there. On the pavement side, we've been awarded a substantial amount of funding for pavement and have been able to, as the pie shows, do the investment that we had planned, and we've exceeded the $3 million a year target that we had going into this levy. However, construction costs have impeded our progress, and rather than reaching that 80 PCI for arterials, our arterials currently have a PCI rating of 72, and most of them are in very good to excellent condition. So we do have good condition arterials. The condition of our local streets, however, brings our average down to 65, which is still good, but it's well below that sweet spot for streets. Sidewalks, we've had a challenging grant environment, and construction costs have also impeded our progress. And then crosswalks, we've experienced some success so far, including implementing the crosswalk flag program in partnership with between traffic or transportation engineering and street operations and community members who have been willing to help monitor those flag locations to make sure that they don't all walk away for a long period of time. And then just to say that page 24 of your council packet lists all of the city's accomplishments that have been fueled by the levy thus far. So then into the future. So funding needs beyond 2025. Council has adopted the 2040 vision, and there are several aspects of that vision that are in the wheelhouse, firmly in the wheelhouse of levy funds. So in particular, connecting neighborhoods for one city, one of the goal areas, and then moving in and around Bothell. And then also environmental stewardship, the non-motorized aspect of our transportation system, the maintenance of that is levy funded. Also, the comprehensive plan will inform our needs beyond 25, multimodal level of service that council has been talking about, safety projects, resiliency projects. And then DEI is a really important thing for us as a department. And our goal is to get people safely where they need to go, regardless of their ability, their travel mode, or their destination. So getting a little more detailed into the needs that we foresee into the future. Non-motorized infrastructure. We now have an adopted bike plan. We have multi-use trails that folks are wanting and that we are constructing and finishing, but more to come. And also the demand for sidewalks is always strong. And we saw that in the budget survey, it was 5th on the list, the connections in the city via sidewalks, transit, trails, and roads. So those are some of our capital programs. Also continued investment in pavement preservation, probably including working on some of those local streets, to the ones with heavier usage in particular, so that we can try to make some progress there. Our our state of the streets report that was attached to your council packet, our consultant has said that in order to get our entire system up to an 80 PCI would be about $181 million over 20 years. And in order to get there, recommended $39 million in year one. I'm like, oh my goodness. Or you could spread it out over 20 years, $9 million a year, and get the entire system up to 74. He also anticipates, and the reason why we targeted $3 million a year investment in the Safe Streets and Sidewalks levy was because the continued estimate is that with that sort of investment, we could get our arterials to an 80 PCI. However, the locals will continue to degrade pretty significantly. The other capital program needs just the safety and resiliency programs, as well as transportation demand management that are all proposed in the Imagine Bothell Comprehensive Plan. And on the operations side, so the total annual expenditures in street operations in 2023 was $3.2 million. Staff is over half of that. We have 12 operations team members in streets, and then there's portions of other positions that are also funded by the street fund. Utilities, primarily electricity for our traffic signals and streetlights, is the second biggest chunk of this pie. And in 2023, state shared revenues that continue to exist, so it's primarily gas tax, contributed about $1 million to street operations, and the levy was $2.4 million of that operation. So, and just going forward, additional resources, including staff, we anticipate would be needed to maintain the future non-motorized infrastructure in particular. So finally, enough of my talking. As I mentioned in the beginning, we're here to receive feedback from you. And we have our next slides will cover up to 3 policy decisions. So the first policy question, would you like staff to research options to replace the Safe Streets and Sidewalks levy? If yes, we can maintain or increase the level of service to the community. If this is the choice that you would like to make, we have more information for you. If no, the city would no longer provide the services, or the city could partially or fully fund the services and reduce other city programming. And if this is the council's choice, we'll return later with more information there. So I think we'll pause here and have some discussion about this question, if we may.
Yeah, and just framing it a different way, we don't want to assume that we're just going to continue doing what we were doing. So we don't want to paint like a picture of, we don't want this to come across like a no choice question, but really, as you've heard some of the revenue choices earlier tonight, kind of having the reactions of how you would want to proceed. Before we start talking to you about options of funding, the first question is where do we want to go? So.
Okay, thank you. One question, I noticed in the packet there was some projects, was it sidewalks that we were behind on with the, and sidewalks are a hard thing to get grants for.
Yes.
So in a word, would we like to research options to replace Safe Streets and Sidewalks levy? In a word, yes. Would we want to frame the levy in a way of things that are achievable for the public, so that they don't go, well, you didn't deliver on sidewalks, but things that we know that we have a higher confidence, put that on the levy and find other ways to fit I don't know. That's just a question that I want to put out in considering putting a levy together, is how do we frame it so that I think the public wants safe streets and sidewalks. How do we encourage them to be enthusiastic about it?
Right.
When you when you just put the numbers down, and I think it was $39 million in year one and 181 over 20 years, just to maintain what we have. Like, the cost of maintaining just the roads that we have is absolutely staggering. And, you know, we have to maintain what we have, and we have to acknowledge the reality of the now while we try to create a better future. I guess my question would be, one of the things we can do to keep the roads in a better state of maintenance is to obviously do this. But another thing is, as we go along, is there a way to start implementing some of the protected bike infrastructure, maybe narrowing the lanes a little bit, getting some safety, and like as we go along and maintain this, and we've already got everything closed down, is there a possibility that this could be combined with an effort to give people better ways to get around?
Yeah, so I think I'm going to phone a friend on this one, and I think Steve is my target for this phone call.
Steve's like, I'm surprised it took this long. for
Yeah,
you to come up
exactly.
here.
Right, like, yeah.
I think yes. I think staff thinks there would be ways. There are challenges. If you look around Bothell, a couple of things that pop out are there's not a lot of roads right now that actually can take a lot of road diet. Typically, you go from a 5-lane to a 3-lane or 3-lane to a 2-lane. We have a lot of 2-lane roads that we just can't. You basically have to widen them just to get your protected bike lane. I think there are certain corridors we could look at alternatives that would look different than what our standard detail currently is and potentially could save us some funding. I'm thinking of corridors like Meridian, where the road is kind of offset in the right-of-way, and there's a potential for not just bike lanes on both sides, but maybe something on one side. There are pluses and minuses to that, though, as well. When we install new sidewalks, as an example, our standard says put a buffer and then the sidewalk, which is what is preferable and feels safer. You'll notice that some of our sidewalks that we put in don't have that buffer. And it's just a challenge because a lot of our sidewalk gaps are in areas that are the most difficult to put it in. And if we put that buffer in, then we're in a wetland, which doesn't make sense, or we're building a taller wall and things like that. So there are trade-offs. We can get creative. But I'm not sure in the long run that's actually going to work out. I suspect it's going to be a percentage of all the opportunities and not most of the opportunities. If that makes sense.
No, that makes sense. I'm a yes. I don't want to take anything off the table right now. And this is already something our community has voted for and said is important for them. So I would like to just get more information about what that would look like.
Thank you. It seems like we talk about this topic more often than you'd like, I guess. Yeah. The question, it's the grant challenges for sidewalks. Is it like because they're independent projects, or is it usually, is it like if you ask for a grant for sidewalks individually, is that why it's challenging?
There are certain mechanisms we have. In the current, as an example, in the current federal cycle, typically you're in the non-motorized category. There are state grants, TIB grants, that have a state sidewalk category, and the other one that primarily we use is either pedestrian bike grants or safe route to school grants. Those are probably the better ones for sidewalks. There are unbelievably high number of applicants for those.
Of course.
And you typically get the top maybe quarter that get funded and the 3/4 don't. So as an example, this year we're going to apply for 4 more? I think 4 of the ones that we already have tried before, a couple of which are just below the line and we're hoping to get just above the line. Maybe some of the ones have been cleared out and we can rise a little bit. But that's the challenge. There's just so much money region-wide, and there's a lot of people trying to put sidewalks in.
Yeah, because we didn't make investments like 50 years ago, so we're seeing the results now, just like
So what we
housing.
tried to do, which is good and bad, is we've tried to hold off a little bit and try to apply for grants, both in pavement preservation and sidewalks. And in pavement preservation, it's kind of paid off. This year, we're doing a bunch of grant-funded projects. Sidewalks, we haven't been quite so successful. So after this year, if we don't get any positive signs of grants, we're going to pull the trigger and locally fund. We can't fund all 4, maybe we can fund 2 of them. So again, we're shooting for the stars, and if we can't hit it, then we're going to do what we can.
Is this ever going to improve the situation? Because like sidewalks, to your point, are needed everywhere. Like, is
I think it
somebody
will.
going for them?
I was just at a regional grant meeting today, all day, and there's talk about having to revisit how we're scoring. The scoring is really set up in the federal funds that we get. It's typically set up by Puget Sound Regional Council and kind of a committee and everybody. So until that committee really changes their focus, we're kind of subject to the scoring criteria on how it's set up. But there's talk about that because just like we're seeing now, capacity projects are still kind of important, but we're kind of getting to the place where all these non-motorized are more important. But a lot of the criteria is set up so that if you have a center, a regional center, supporting that is the most important thing. And the non-motorized just can't move the people that, unless it's really close, it can't move the people that a capacity project or a transit project can do. So again, I think we have to, as a region, kind of revisit that criteria. So I think it's coming, but it may take a few years to get there.
Thank you. Very, very helpful. And I assume we're going to be creative also when we think about a road project. We're going to say, okay, can we sneak in something with a sidewalk or an improvement or a bike, whatever, right?
So I think one of the things we'll talk about at the capital facility plan is how we want to try to use some of the program funds. Like right now, we've stuffed a little bit more in the bike side, which gives us some opportunities, which I'll talk about, how we've tried to hop on that. But as I think I talked about before in the 6-year tip, I think one of the important things we need to do is try to get ahead of ourselves and plan some of these projects out. And if we can do that smartly, we might compete better for some of these projects and or have a better idea how much they will cost. So when we have things like levies come up, we have a better sense of what we can get done over a 9-year period and perhaps be more on target with what our aspirations are.
I read the 80 PCI, which you reiterated, Aaron. What is that? How is that number derived? Like, is that arbitrary?
That magical number. So the idea with pavement preservation is just kind of like your roof in your house. If you don't maintain it, it's going to cost you more and more money as you let it go more because you're going to have more and more damage. So that's kind of how it works. So unfortunately, when we spend less money, even now, we assign more money to it, but not enough to fully cover the backload. We're still losing ground because more damage is occurring before we can catch up. The 80 PCI is aspirational. I think there's very few agencies out there who actually get the 80, but that's about the number where you would probably have the minimal amount of repairs. So long-term, your maintenance costs would be the lowest. None of the agencies actually get there because they never have enough money to get to.
Like, is that based on research, what you just said? If you reach this magical number, your maintenance costs will suddenly be optimal? And
I think it's a little of both. I think there's numbers behind it, but I think it's also an engineering judgment about where you need to be based on.
Like it's 72, is that a good enough number for us? And like we can bring the local streets up to that number while we maintain 72.
I think 72 and 80, I don't think an average driver would know the difference. I think what it's going to happen is you actually are probably going to spend a little bit more money maintaining it at a 72 than at an 80. Because by the time you cycle through to keep that 72, it's an average. So you have hundreds and you have 65s. The more 65s you have, the more money you're tossing in per square foot. If you have 70s and 90s, the 70s take a little bit less money to repair than the 60s were, and that's all they're saying. So I think we can get close to an 80. I'm not sure we're actually going to achieve it, but functionally, I think we're going to get there pretty soon as long as we maintain our current levy funding. We can get to the arterial 80s. Like Aaron is saying, though, our local streets are starting to drop, and that's going to be something we need to address.
And speaking of levy funding, to answer the question now posed here is, so it's 5.1 million a year, right? That's what we get from the levy, plus or minus, no? Or is
Yeah, it's a little bit more at this point in time, which a later slide will show.
Oh, okay. Oh, we haven't got that. Well, I want to answer the question
There's
because...
more.
But wait, there's more. So the question is, are we going to, if we maintain, I mean, unless you're saying it'll double, are we going to continue having similar issues where the pie charts you showed earlier are you're going to be focused on certain things and you can't do other things because you only have $6 million to spend?
Yeah.
Like what's the number for extra revenue that we need to be able to do more than what we've been doing over the past 10 years, you know?
Yes. What is that? What is that magic number? Yes. And as we go through this, staff will come back with some options if council so chooses, that we can say, like, this level of investment we think would provide this. One of the things that we were anticipating would happen with this existing levy that hasn't really, as much as we thought at some point street operations would start sort of like eating into the money for our capital programs, but it hasn't happened that way as yet. So the revenues have increased enough so that we haven't had to cut haven't had to reduce the capital operating programs. But at some point when there is a lot more to maintain, that could happen. But
one thing I'd add too is as we progress through, one of the questions that you'll see, I've seen in the agenda bill too, is on some of the guiding principles of what council would want to see. So I think there's this combination of, again, we're in the conceptual phase, which is difficult, but we're hoping that this work now makes October feel a little bit better too. But there's the concept of, do we want the work to continue? Then we're going to be looking at the questions around at what cost, and while we don't have tied funding packages to it at this time, we would love some guiding principle type direction at this point in time, so staff can return with some funding packages that'll really get tuned up as we go out to the community. Mm-hmm. Anytime we ask the voters to consider funding, we want to paint a picture of, if similar to the questions we've been getting tonight, if you approve this is what you should expect. And with the accountability report, we're going to report back and tell them. And so again, like, that's why we've seen it's very helpful to go back 9 years and say, well, what were we asking the voters to do? And it was a lot of preservation work, and it was answering a problem at the time of a revenue stream went away. The council now gets the choice of saying, maybe there's other options of how you want to distribute from different funding sources. We're seeing the impact of a 9-year levy, and as it goes away after 9 years, it leaves you with a question of, wait a minute, like, what we want to still see new investments going on. We still need to address sidewalks and crosswalks, and now we have a bike plan that we really want to implement. And so operations, where does that fit in? But we don't foresee a realistic situation where you don't do any of that work for 9 years either. So it's a great question of saying, and I think, so again, we don't necessarily have to dwell on this question, the yes or no question, for much longer. I don't see a lot of no's. Then we'll progress into then some of the options of what you've heard about in revenues, of what does it look like? And then we'll start refining on the what are we going to do.
Councilmember Aldrich.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, you are hearing a lot of yeses, and I will add mine to the conversation. And I'm just thinking back to canvassing and talking to members of the community, and not only do they support more sidewalks and improved sidewalks, but they're very anxious to see even more progress being made towards the safe streets and sidewalks goal. And so that's a big reason for why I would want to continue to explore those options. And I'm glad that, the only option on the table isn't just renew the levy, but you'll be bringing other options to us as well. So thank you.
So shall we move on to guiding principles? Okay, excellent. So, thank you, Steve.
This may be more appropriate for this one, but you had mentioned like what sort of like are the big picture things around it. Is that what we're going to talk now? And should I hold my fire?
You can speak at will. You're the mayor.
But I want to speak when it's appropriate. No, I mean, this isn't going to surprise you, but like as we look at what we're doing, I think we need to prioritize systemic change more than just trying to hold on to what we have. Because if our need is, double what this levy is over 20 years, assuming the levy keeps going, like it seems to me like we're not getting ahead of the curve. Like we're falling just a little farther behind. Like, so I don't see that there's ever going to be a time when it's going to be convenient and we'll be fully caught up on maintenance. So now we can do the things that would help us require less maintenance in the future. So I want to see what we can do to get ahead of the system rather than get ahead of the problem. So prioritize that.
All right. So staff was putting together this presentation and the agenda bill for council consideration. These are just some of the ideas as we were kind of spitballing. Some of the subject areas, so to speak, around some guiding principles. So feedback from council would be much appreciated. If you think we're on the right track, if there are some specific guiding principles you would like to suggest to staff, or even if some of these categories resonate more with you than others, staff is more than happy to come back to you with some more thought around these as well. It's like Family Feud.
I know, very polite Family Feud.
Yes.
At least with the deputy mayor. I don't know about everyone else. So the first thing that strikes me is, and this is something I've been talking about sort of with neighboring city councils and just people who hear public comment. Public engagement is super important. I don't want it to be the project supported by the loudest people happens. So really balancing equity indicators with public engagement. I think that there are neighborhoods that can get loud and with reason, I'm sure most of the time, but at the same time, that doesn't mean that's the highest priority project. So I've really appreciated going through the bike plan and having all these different ways to look at projects to help us. Because if we just say what's most important, we all live in different parts of the city. We're going to come up with like 7 different most important projects, right? And I really like these. I think with environmental sustainability, can you give me an example of how that would be graded?
So, I mean, I think from both the fiscal sustainability and environmental sustainability, the items up above that are already geared in that direction. So we're definitely focusing more on non-motorized transportation. We're focusing on resilience. We're focusing on getting people out of their cars with transportation demand management. So there are a lot of things that are included in both your vision as well as the comprehensive plan, at least as it's headed, that are, in my mind, firmly in the environmental sustainability arena. So really focusing on taking care of what we have, sustaining what we have, and also focusing on that non-motorized. So in addition to building more sidewalks and bike lanes, for example, using the prioritization processes that council has already adopted. In addition to that, taking more robust care of our North Creek Trail system. We've been spending a lot of time, energy, and money on developing that. And in order for it to be seen as a real transportation corridor, it's important that it be cared for like a transportation corridor and that people can rely on it being, well kept. So those are some of the things that we've been thinking about, both from the not only the construction perspective, but also the maintenance perspective. Okay, thank you.
I'm wondering, and maybe this gets back to the previous slide, but we fund traffic light through this levy. We fund snowplow operation through this levy. We fund, why are we, I'm not going to support a levy that's not going to pass and that I'm not going to do the work to get it to pass. But why are we putting our eggs in this basket? That just doesn't seem really like fiscally sustainable. What if it doesn't pass? Do the streetlights turn off? Do they would flash, right? So every intersection of four-way stop. I'm just getting at fiscal sustainability to me means this levy is like a special package of capital improvement projects or trial maintenance or things that we're moving forward that aren't part of operational stuff that the city should be funded. People expect the traffic lights to operate. People expect the snowplow routes to be. So I'm wondering, do I have this whole levy wrong? Safe Streets and Sidewalks it was a replacement fund source at the time, but shouldn't the things that it funded really be in our normal budget? They shouldn't be as part of a levy where we are kind of we're going out on a limb to the community and saying, do you want this? But we're putting all the exciting, interesting little things in there that we really want them to fund and saying, well, you fund these interesting sidewalk projects, but if you choose not to fund it, that's okay. But also the traffic lights, also the snowplow, also. So I'm missing something out on why is this even a levy?
Right. So, and again, one of the things that staff is here is asking council which revenue options would you like us to explore? And I think your point's well taken that, and I see fiscal sustainability in a similar way that you do, that ongoing expenditures that we know are there, should they be funded with ongoing revenues that are reliable and sustainable? Because you're absolutely right. If 16% of our street fund budget is keeping our traffic signals and streetlights on, boy, that's a lot. Just right off the top.
And I think some of the history of what has been shared through this, and we moved quickly through it, but I think you said about 3 years the city council was trying to look at grapple with how are we going to replace these revenues. So I think about, we've put some contextual shoes on tonight about what will future councils think. And so again, to their credit of what was in the levy was what was funded. And so the urgent need was around, as much as we look at it now, we're like, as we're at the end of 9 years, what is the alternative of snow plows and streetlights? You're absolutely right. So I think this is a great opportunity of then looking at what do we know now. And again, we want to bring options forward that respond to what council would want to see. And then point well taken about, I think one of the community or the guiding principles is around community stakeholder feedback of what is the community asking for, because we want to offer them a package saying, this is what we've heard for you. Did we get it right? So as we talked about as well with kind of like reserve policy of, there's also the option of how do we transition this over time? So there might be some options that we want to think about of shifting the revenue stream. That could be a guiding principle around trying to move away from operations out of time-limited revenue streams. That's a great guiding principle for us. And again, we may not be able to solve that in 1 year, but we can come up with a package of how do we transition and make different choices. So really appreciate the observation, because you're absolutely right. Is that we look at here too as that's not for the both sake of serving the community and promising them of what they're going to expect. We don't want to have to say, you may or may not have snow plowing. Mm-hmm. We also, from a standpoint of, it came up earlier, I appreciate the mayor talked about being a desirable place to work. We also want to, reassure our employees, and I will reassure our employees of this levy fund goes out. We are not turning off street operations. We are going to have difficult conversations though. And so how do we be real about that too? So I really appreciate that lens and thinking about that as one of the guiding principles as we come back. What I hear is let's not have programmed dollars be something that could go away overnight.
Thank you.
Excellent point. And I think that if we're thinking of economic or financial sustainability, that for a levy, we ought to be thinking about creating something that gets it up to good condition, and then we can, out of another pocket, sustain, take care of. But I think some of the conversation that we were having about streets was getting them up to the point where they're not degrading, and then we could take care of them outside of what the levy provides. I think that was a great clarification to be asking for. So, quick question, when you were talking about environmental sustainability, would that include things like stormwater runoff on streets where we could treat our stormwater better before it goes into a pipe? That's just a question.
So, okay. I may need to phone a friend on this one too. I'll get started on it, and I'm trying to think of which friend is probably the best. So maybe they'll self-select. I'm thinking between Jason and Boyd, maybe. So with stormwater regulations and maybe even Councilmember Curd. Stormwater regulations becoming more strict, there will be more activities that we do that are no longer exempt from stormwater treatment. Because right now, when we do overlays, we typically don't do stormwater management along with that. We don't make any changes to that. Because that's one of the reasons why our big road projects are very expensive is stormwater infrastructure is very expensive. So I don't necessarily know that within the levy, I mean, certainly when we do the bigger projects that trigger stormwater treatment, then we of course do that. But that's more on the bigger capital side typically. Can I do okay? Okay. Thank you.
I want to jump in on this line of conversation that Councilmember Curd started as well. Because the levy that we just did was 90% maintenance and operations and 10% capital projects. And I would love to find a way to, and the ongoing maintenance is necessary. It's not bad. I would love to find a way to fund that with ongoing revenues. So, when we go out for a levy and we talk to our community, and we talk about the last one, we can say something like, I would much rather say the levy built that sidewalk you've been asking for than the levy moved the PCI from 68 to 74 over the last 9 years. That doesn't mean anything to folks in the community that want a sidewalk and don't see a sidewalk. And they want the roads to work when they go, and they understand the need for that. But I feel like if we're asking for above and beyond in a levy, I feel like we should focus that on the new capital project side. So, but then we have to figure out how to pay for it. And nobody's found the money fairy that I keep asking for, but I remain hopeful.
Kyle is building a printer downstairs, money printer.
Not in a public meeting, Rami.
Based on blockchain. Question. Actually, it goes back to the opportunity cost conversation we had before when we talk about reserves Because if I agree with Councilmember Curd, if we have ongoing operations, they shouldn't be through one-off funding options. Even though it's 9 years, it's still a one-off funding option. So I think it makes sense to focus it on capital projects, because like one-time fee, and then you figure out what is the ongoing maintenance. And this is where the question I asked earlier on is like, what are we trying to, like we had a review of all the revenues. What do we want to build, to maintain, to like, what does the whole budget look like? Then we can decide, okay, we need this funding source, and how much we need to raise each funding source. So that it's along the lines of the fiscal sustainability, but because, everything is very, like the vision and Imagine Bothell Comprehensive Plan, that's like a far away thing, but we need to build towards it, like sidewalks, we need to get roads proper, we need to have Boyd's sewer lines properly built and maintained. So I don't know, I don't have a right answer, so I need more information. I feel like I need more information on, like, maybe not all the level, like the CFP level details, which we are going to review later, but like more information about what are our spending needs over the 2 or 4 years or 6 years,
And we'll be happy to bring back more information on that. The finance director did do some calculations, and since he's being the PowerPoint guru, I will look at notes. But just for some context, again, this doesn't get to your question because you're not seeing the array of everything. But if we look at our general fund operating budget, it's about $75 million a year. So when we talk about this, if a half of the $5 million, we'll round because it's easier and I'm not your finance director, half of the $5 million Safe Street levy is paying for M&O. So we're looking at about, it'd be 3.4% of the total general fund is what we'd be looking at. So that's the offset. So $2.5 million out of the $75 million we'd need to shift from dedicated to other programs to the ongoing. So there's different, again, we can look at scenarios of what that looks like. We can look at portions of that, again, if there's scalability options in this. So, but to give some high level context for tonight, what we'd be talking about is, again, about that just under 4% or 3.4% of the total general fund would be what would be supplanted to do that. So again, it would take some work, and that's what we're here for.
I was going to pipe in, and I'm sad that I went first because Councilmember Curd had like a very good point. And I want to second that or fourth it or fifth it or whatever we are at. But also the slide about the TBD, that we're not using that taxing authority right now. So this is very loose, Kindle Scribe math, but if it's $46 million over 9 years for the levy and half of that goes to maintenance, it seems like the 0.1% that we can just do as council on the tax would get, is this what I'm talking about right now? But it would get us close to the maintenance with the sales tax option, and then a levy could be the additional. But does it seem within the realm of possibility that we could fund maintenance and operations in a better, more sustainable way, and then get to the, I'm going to say fun projects, but honestly, like the safety and all the stuff that people think of when they think of the levy on the next levy? Like that's, okay, I think we're about to talk about that, but.
Sure. So we're hearing yes, and I think we got some good feedback for sort of guiding principles as well.
I'm sorry, Director.
Yeah.
There were 2 things that I wrote down that I didn't get to that I just want to say real fast before we move on.
Yes.
Just the first is that I really appreciate hearing you talk about the internal conversations you're having. It's awesome to have that context. That was one of them. I'll go fast. And big picture concepts is just build more protected, safe, multimodal infrastructure, starting with the places in the city where it will serve the most people and enable the most trips. And then that hits a whole bunch of the other priorities that were up there. So that's
Thank
That's what
you.
I didn't say earlier.
Really
Thank
appreciate
you.
it. And
Yeah.
we'll make sure that we pause for effect before we move on to the next topic too, in case there is anything else. So thank you for making sure we
Yes.
captured that.
Yes. Okay. So this is property tax levy scenarios first. So this is not a proposal, just two reference examples. And Councilmember Dodd will get to the sales tax next. So currently, the levy is effectively 33 cents per thousand of assessed valuation, and the annual revenue is about 5.8 million. Going back to the 50 cents that we originally had per 1,000 of assessed value would bring in about 8.6 million estimated. And then for the sales tax, and just as a reminder about the sales tax is they do have a 10-year limitation unless you're using it for repayment of debt. So not necessarily sustainable either beyond 10 years. Unless we were to have debt associated with maybe some big projects or that sort of thing.
Yeah, you can bond and then
Yeah.
pay back the tax.
Right. And then you could extend it beyond 10 years. So currently, so in last year, the levy paid for, what would I say, $2.4 million of street operations.
Are you done?
I am.
Oh, no, it's cool. Because this is an interesting idea, because none of the options we have are permanent. They're all one-off, even though they're 9 or 10 years, like sales tax or levy. Like doing finance magic, maybe perhaps we can extend this. I'd hate to be in debt forever, but maybe that's a way to do the ongoing operations and have ongoing revenue sources beyond the time limitations. Is that an option? Like, is that something, like, is the state going to come back and say, okay, why you go doing this for 15 years instead of 10 or 11?
Again, trying to get the feedback today or tonight, we'll be coming back with those options. So there are mechanisms, but again, we need to test with the authority with the state.
Because when you go to, if you raise 0.1%, say you do this option, I mean, people are going to see it in their everyday, day-to-day shopping. You're going to see it in your, possibly in your, on your gas tank as you fill up. So when people see this, they're going to ask questions. So if we have a good answer to the points brought up earlier, then that might be something that, because the money has to come from somewhere until we get the blockchain system that set up that, you know, Kyle wants to do, then we don't have the money. So that's the only way. Like if you're a resident here, you're leveraging,
Yes.
utilizing the services, the infrastructure, all that stuff. Like we all have to, you know, put in our share in. So, but we need to have a good. If people aren't doing well, or not are doing that, if they keep seeing those things adding up without seeing significant, to the mayor's point, significant visible things, then it will be a tough pill to swallow. If that makes sense.
And again, the earlier questions about who pays and who benefited from all those improvements, that's the other consideration between a property tax, levy renewal, or a sales tax. So.
I have a question. Sorry.
Yeah, the only other thing I would say is the only revenue that is not time limited is the license fee. So the license fee doesn't have a required sunset date.
And the revenue that it brings is, you know, barely pays for the NVIDIA chips that Kyle's going to bring for his blockchain.
At least in the beginning. It can get up to higher than that after multiple years. But as the city manager mentioned, staff can come back with a few strategy options for you.
I will say the license fee is the one that's the hardest for me to wrap my head around. I pay all of these things, right? Property tax and sales tax and all that stuff. But like, that one's the one that always hurts the most when I pay the bill, so I don't know about adding more to it. With the 10-year maximum, is that like forever? Like no other council could ever do that again? Is there like a cool-off period? Like what are the details of that maximum?
I think you can choose to renew it. So you can choose to renew it.
Okay, so we'd authorize it for up to 10 years, but then we'd have to, as a council, vote again if it's the 0.1, or to the voters again if it's more?
Yeah,
I think so.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
the only way you can do it you can renew it for more than 10 years is for debt. Yeah. I think. But yeah,
But
cooling off
then we
period
would
is a
need
good
to-
question. Yeah.
We'll follow up with an email.
It's like if you just like change the name, or like, round 2 Electric Boogaloo, and then you're good, or like, I'm just curious about that. Thank you.
It's a different 10%. All right, so I think we've heard bits and pieces, but I do think a good last call, if there's any other direction that you'd want us to be working on to bring back, we'll pause here before we move on to utilities. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. This has been very helpful. And I would talk about this every night. I kind of do, so.
So, council, again, we're now moving forward. This is a little bit of a shift, but maybe a palate cleanser. We've talked about this certainly recently in the fall. And again, the change here is primarily is that we are looking at a 2-year consideration. So again, nothing for tonight, but the big impact is that we do want to be able to talk about what is possible, what is planned, and then so therefore when you hear about it again in the fall and it's closer to adoption, if there's any questions tonight, it would be helpful, or any direction that you want us to consider, we can go execute that over the summer. And with that, we are going to go to our subject matter expert, Boyd Benson.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Thanks so much for your time. As City Manager mentioned, this is almost more of an update. We had a pretty exhaustive study in 2023, and I'll go through not too many slides, but it's mostly been updated with the year-to-date 2023 information. So this is the 2-year 2025-2026 water, sewer, and storm and surface water utility rates, and then also some discussion about cleaning up some utility tax work with respect to fire hydrants. No actions requested this time. So once again, we completed the 2023 rate study. We looked at revenue requirements exhaustively. We looked at expenses with the CFP in the budget at the time. We came back with recommended rate increases, and those were recommended rate increases over a 9-year period, a uniform rate increase. And the goal was to provide a steady revenue stream to get the work done, to complete day-to-day operations, but also not to see what you see at some other what could happen at some other jurisdictions where you see low rate increases and then very high and then lower and high. We're trying to really plan to take out those peaks and valleys and plan appropriately. And at that time, we also had some discussion with council about setting a 2-year rate. So for the recent update work in Q1, Q2, 2024, we had, like I mentioned, the year-to-date 2023, so we could kind of verify the fund finance models that we had developed. We have a draft CFP for the utilities. It has not changed much, but we do have some updated costs for that, which we've incorporated. We do have wholesale cost information for both the water purchase from SPU. Good news, it's not going up, and wholesale sewer treatment from King County. Unfortunately, that's going up quite a bit. And with all that information, we've updated those models to look at, it should be, say, 2024 to 2031, but that time period. So what we're presenting today is the draft proposal for council to consider, and that's to remain with the rate increases that were included in the 2023 study. We'll try to demonstrate that it provides adequate funding for 2025-26. We'll provide more information in the future. But also the good news on this is when you look at these funds over the long period through 2020, 2031, we don't see any red. We have positive fund balances, and that's very important because once we start seeing negative fund balances, we get in trouble from finance. And we have to do some serious work with respect to can we cut day-to-day services, and that's not always possible. We have to maintain these utilities, or do we have to start postponing or cutting projects, which can happen, and projects get delayed, but the more we do that, then we see the cumulative effect of, now things cost more. So next steps, and the hydrant tax, and we'll try to demonstrate in this, it's intended as a net zero impact to the ratepayers, and we'll talk about that in a second. But we'll be coming back in Q3-4 with additional discussion, additional information, and public hearing. And one thing I may have mentioned, or I may not have mentioned, it may be in a future slide, but typically we look at rate increase comparisons or rate comparisons with other jurisdictions. We are so early in the process, we can't do that. So we'll come back with that information. Thank you. Once again, look at overall revenue requirements, rate increases to ensure in fiscal health, and then comparisons. Wow, I think I've gone through most of this. Municipal code updates. I have a slide for the hydrant tax and a few more slides. Next, please. Okay, so now for the nitty-gritty. For the water revenue and rate requirements, what we did is we looked at, and these are all draft numbers. This is based on when we start looking at rates, we basically take the draft CFP, we plug in those costs, we look at treatment costs, we look at staffing increases, a 3.0 CPI increase, it's a placeholder, we look at growth, 1% growth rate, we look at revenue from permits, all these things in this fund finance model. And so the upper plot kind of shows you that expenditures vary year to year. And what you'll see on some of the other utility funds is there's some deferred projects. And this one, we're just kind of bouncing all over the place. So there's some of the higher numbers, let's say in 2030, are with respect to reservoirs and the rest. But over time, in this time period, we're looking at $33 million in capital project costs. You start looking at the funding strategy. Right now, almost 50% comes from rates. It's an important component. Capital facility charges, we recently updated those, 2022, and then the grants, we're always looking for grants. So we're always trying to increase that corner of the pie. But rates are the ones that really help us get that work done. So what we look at, and you'll see a slide on the next one, but not yet, please, is that without that rate increase, over that period, it's amazing the power of compounding interests, we're at a $15 million shortfall. And that's not a good thing. If we maintain that 6.25% rate increase for the 25-26, we're fiscally sound. And if we maintain it through 2031, we can get the work done that's within the current CFP and the planned CFP. Next slide, please. So this is a graphic that council gave us some feedback on last time, and I think it's a good way to go in the future. So when you look at O&M for water, that includes water purchase. That includes everything. That's day-to-day to get things done. Debt service, we actually like that. We'd like to get more debt so we can spread these costs over time, make our rates more stable. And the real one is we see that there's a lot of capital work to be done. So if we maintain our current rates, if we get to the point where we cannot look at rate increases, what it shows is we will not be able to do our capital work. We will not be able to do our day-to-day operations by 2031. So staff is recommending maintaining that 6.25% increase, and it does a really good job, like I said. Over the long term in this fund, when you really start looking at, I'm sorry, if you go back one, when you really start looking at this, and once again, it fully supports the draft, the current adopted CFP, the draft CFP, maintains our revenues, maintains our reserves and O&M. What it we do see is when we look at these fund finance models, we talk about cash, available fund balance. That's the money we can work with. That does decrease over time. We do a lot of our projects on cash basis. So if we had a zero available fund balance, that already includes all our costs, right? Operations and capital. That's great because it's perfectly balanced. It doesn't happen that way. But so what we see is we build up reserve, we build up a available fund balance, and then we spend it on things. And that number drops over time. That's not a bad thing. That was part of what we looked at in the rate study. We don't want to continue to do that forever because then we'll get in trouble. But over the 2031 period, we're in okay shape. But it does drop over that time. So we're recommending the 6.25% for water. And we have similar slides for both sewer and storm, but at this time, would you like to discuss water, or would you like to go on?
I don't have any specific questions. I mean, we have to maintain what we have, continuing servicing it, and costs go up, and it's an enterprise fund, so it has to pay for itself. So I don't see a lot of choice here. So.
Okay. And you can see real examples of these capital projects. I don't know if you've driven through Valhalla, but that is going to increase the service to our community, decreases the number of breaks, and it turned out to be a really good project. And when you were discussing earlier about can overlays and pavement restoration help with bike lanes, well, no, but we can make sure that we get utilities done beforehand. So when you look at that project, it resulted in a road overlay. It resulted in good utilities. We took care of storm sewer water. So it's a good project. That's a good example of a water project. Next, please. Sewer, it's very similar. We don't have as large of projects. We don't have big reservoirs for sewer. We've updated most of our sewer lift stations. We won't see those updated for probably another 10, 15 years. We're right now coming off the shoulders of some, like I said, big projects. So when you see 2024, that's for the Valhalla work, and then 2025 it bleeds into that, and then the rest just once again they're not as large magnitude as the water. The water being a pressure system is much more vulnerable to age. So when you look at the costs over time, it's about $13 million in the time period. If we don't look at these rate increases, we have a shortfall. Which when you look at this, it's more than our capital costs, and the reason that is because the treatment costs are increasing rapidly. For sewer treatment, right now with King County, the rate increase, this is the wholesale rate we pay for every person that for every residence we discharge to. 5.75% in 2025, 7% in 2026 to 2027, 8.25 through 31, 9.25 beyond. So the first question the finance director asks us, how can we have rates this low if our treatment costs are raising that high? And in the short term, we're doing okay. We had a very large available fund balance, and we're trying these are very high increases. They are already programmed into our financial models, and we do okay. Over the time period, we see about a $4 million in available fund balance decrease. It's still okay. In the future, we'll be having to ask these harder questions because it may not be sustainable if we see these increases or if King County comes back with even larger increases, which unfortunately right now for a residential customer, about 3/5 of what they pay goes right to the county. So this isn't the day-to-day operations. That's what we pay for treatment. It's a huge cost. So if you double that, which will happen by 2031, there's not a lot of ways to absorb that.
Could you repeat again the rate increase that they're talking about over time?
Yeah, so it's 5.75 and we can email this out as well, in 2025, and then 7 in 2026, 27, 8.25 through 31, and then 9.25 beyond. And what we've seen in the past is these rates go forward relatively high, and then I think there's pushback at the county level as well, and they get decreased, and then they come back the next year and they show that again. So it's always kind of a moving target.
With those, the fees that are going up for waste processing, isn't that somewhat also King County's like capital projects that are meant to, help Puget Sound, effluent treatment, like resiliency measures too? So it's not like they're just raising the rates on us. They're doing things that justify those rates?
Quite somewhat, yes. So the rates I'm quoting now don't include the bigger costs to address nutrient loading in Puget Sound, which could be a treatment plant. And these are numbers that have been said in public, but 2 years ago it could be a 5-fold increase in rates to address that. So right now they're just preparing for that stuff, but they also have a significant amount of deferred maintenance and other issues that they're addressing. So when we talk about this, we're always trying to be part of the solution. When we talk about cure-in-place pipe and I&I, we fully anticipate that these costs are going to come down to the municipalities that pay for the treatment. I'll tell you right now, when you actually look at what they're asking for the next years, yeah, it is to prepare us for nutrient loading, but that's more of just planning and the rest. The real costs are further out, and they've made it very clear those are not included. So it's a good question. It's a good thing to be aware of, and I hope all council is watching this and paying attention to this issue, because it has environmental impacts, and it has a lot of impacts on affordability and repair.
So would you say that the figures that you just shared, again, those are conservative estimates, and we can expect those to maybe even get higher if King County is looking to advance their capital facilities improvements and not just deferred maintenance?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, there are capital projects in there as well, but the nutrient loading into Puget Sound and the issues with that, right now it's to evaluate, it's not to actually construct. And that's one of the big pushes to decrease the entire waste stream. Because if you do that, you may not have to install a new wastewater treatment plant with those huge capital costs that are associated.
Right.
It's a
new
real big deal.
construction and better toilets. Great, thanks.
Would a way to summarize that be essentially the cost increases that are coming in the future are a result of us not having paid the appropriate amount of maintenance costs over time in the past? Aside from...
Yeah, if this was the city of Bothell utility, you could ask that question. Had we done enough maintenance and the rest in the past? And we could answer that question. King County, we can't. We have no control over this. So, but yeah, it raises my eyebrows when I see these rate increases. It's hard enough to bring 4.25% to this city. And when you see numbers that are over almost 10%, it's a really bitter pill to swallow. But it's out of our control. We can write letters and we can be aware and we can try to take care of our portion of the issue. But yeah, these are big numbers.
I had a question when we were on the last slide talking to you. Well, when we were talking about the last slide, you mentioned the Valhalla project as an example of utilities went in, got a new road, combining. Out of curiosity, where we have Alderwood, North Shore, Woodinville Water, do we work with them to combine that work too? And maybe this is really optimistic, but like share the cost of putting in the new road at the end of it, or do
we don't coordinate exactly that closely, but let's say it's the Meridian Roundabout. We'll let them know what's coming down. And if there's development happening there, we'll say, get the sewer in and the water in soon. So we try to have as much coordination as possible. We do interact at the CFP level. I will tell you it's not as close as when we're all working together, but there are definitely, there's interaction. And some of it's required. When we look at 35th Avenue and a fish culvert for stormwater, okay, we have to move water main or this or that. But the rest is we're really trying to be partners with the other utility districts because it just helps everyone. So yeah, so we're definitely heads up on that, and they're keen to do more of that type of relationship building interaction.
Cool, thank you.
Okay, and those are just numbers, but once again, most of our revenue, 71% is rate revenue. And then this next plot will show you where we're at. And once again, the capital portion of this is much lower. The majority of this is to pay for treatment, and staff is recommending to remain with a 4.25%. If everything works out, maybe that will work out through 2031. We don't know, but it definitely works out over the 24, 25, 26 time period. Next slide, please. Storm. You'll see some pretty big numbers in here. So the stormwater projects we're looking at now, fish culverts, restoration of the back nine, things like that. There's some really big numbers in here. When you see these numbers, they might be kind of overwhelming, but when you look at the capital grants and loans, they're huge. And with Storm, we try to leverage our revenue against grants, and if we don't get grants, the projects may be delayed or deferred until we can do so. So when you see these numbers, they're much more grant dependent than the other two utilities. So just take that with a grain of salt, please. But you'll see that there's a very aggressive capital project plan. We think it's realistic, especially with the projects that are grant eligible. And once again, we have a rate increase shortfall. So we recommend the same 5.75% rate increase that was in the 2023 study. What else can I tell you about this slide? Not much. And then once again, our goal is to increase. This doesn't show the increased debt service. It's not plugged in there because we're mostly looking at grants. But what you'll see is if we can't, like I say, get the grants and can't do the projects, you'll see a short-term increase in available fund balance, and then hopefully we can do that. If we have to self-fund these projects, you'll see some of these projects pushed out far into the future. But like I said, they're relatively grant eligible. So that's what we have for stormwater. Any questions about storm?
Not storm per se, but all the three, storm, sewer, and water. You have those charts. When I see in the previous slide, you said 60 million shortfall and we need this much increase. This happens every year, you know, we always need to increase. Is there a way to start looking at, just like we do the financial trends, like here's what we said, here's what the budget is, this one, and then moving forward, we start tracking, to start looking side by side, how the estimates are doing, just for visibility for us and the public.
We do that. I'm not going to share this or pass this out, but you're not going to like this. But when you started talking about reserve funds, it's like, oh, I better get the numbers right. But this is a sheet from the model. So we're looking at past trends, we're looking at estimates against actuals, and we're looking at forecasted. And we're looking at these, I'm not going to say every month, it's maybe every 6 months to check those. So unfortunately, the reality is it's going to be more expensive to buy water, and it's going to be more expensive to treat sewage, and things cost more, there will be rate increases. The only way to not have rate increases is to increase our level of service. Staff would recommend against that because we have regulatory compliance and we want to provide good services. We still have relatively inexpensive rates or not do projects. So I hear what you're saying. And
that wasn't my point. I know that that's the thing, is just to demonstrate that, and maybe sometimes to push back on King County or whoever. Yeah. It's like, hey, you know, you said you're going to raise your rate by 6%, but it's actually 8%. Like our people are suffering, or we are suffering as a city, you know, because we need to maintain that level of service, but we're spending, you know, those conversations. I know you're tracking it, but, you know, we don't see this. I mean, this is obviously abstracted. Yeah. There's a lot of details here, but, you know, seeing like for 2024, a before and after type views, you know.
Yeah, it's a good point. I didn't mean to misunderstand you, but every time I bring these rates forward, it's really tough because these are real costs to real people. So it's a hard discussion to have. But we do ask the questions. We're not an operating board, but it's MUPAC, Municipal Pollution Prevention. It's a group, and we do meet with the county. It's like twice a month, and we do express these concerns. But unfortunately, because it's not an operating board like SPU, where we have a voice and we have a voting right, not directly, but through our groups, we don't have that right. So it really is part of this discussion when we bring forward some of these issues is to educate council. So when you hear these things and you hear about nutrient loading, yeah, we need to address this in Puget Sound, but hey, the costs we're getting from King County are huge, and what else can we do? And gee, look what Bothell's doing, or what other things can we do? So that's part of that education, because I think it's going to be more of a policy political discussion in the future about this.
And I think, Deputy Mayor, to your point of like how do we track this too? I heard from your presentation, there's an aspect of this of where there's sometimes political pressure, and so the rate increases flatten out, but really what it is that's just pushing the load down. And so even being able to have those numbers of what was predicted versus what happened could help maybe articulate through advocacy as well of, at a certain point, the idea of smoothing out the rates is going to be the kindest option that we have, as opposed to at some point, if that spike hits, there's going to be there's already hardship, and then that's the hardship that people can't figure out how to get through. So either we need that smoothing out, or it's an advocacy for what are some programs that can be made available to help ratepayers who cannot sustain a 10% increase. I think that is something we can play around with in terms of how do we visualize this, how do we track it, and how do we prepare for conversations with the county that maybe is where council's voice comes in.
You mentioned, so is the funding for this, stormwater is the heaviest grant funded, correct? Are there grant fundings for the other ones as well? Sorry, I didn't. Or I can't remember the pie charts that you showed.
Yeah, it's less, I mean, even the number of capital projects in sewer is what, a third of this, so it's less, but we always look for it. Like I said, Bothell alone, for the Woodcrest project, we're looking for federal appropriations and hoping for good news on that. And even the 2024 utility project, which includes storm sewer water that's in capital planning right now, we're looking at another Public Works Trust Fund loan, which is a really good way to go. Debt is not a bad thing, especially at the interest rates they quote when they're down near 1%. And I don't mean to sound negative with King County, but I'm of the opinion with the city manager, when they say it's going to double by 2031, and then we hear, well, then it could increase by fivefold. It's like, you should get a handle on this, because that doesn't sound realistic. And once again, they haven't said the fivefold now for a couple of years, but I mean, it really is. I mean, you think they'd plan this stuff out. I think we'd get in trouble if we came to council and said, okay, low rates, and all of a sudden, boom. But that's my opinion. I'm going to stop talking.
Is funding for all those programs, the three utilities, can they be supplemented by a state action for everybody, or federal action for everybody, or is it always the ratepayers who are funded heavily?
So they're enterprise funds, so they operate independently like separate businesses, and there's the capital facility charges for development. We stay on top of those. There's grants and loans and other opportunities, and we try to take advantage of that. But there are not a lot of other options, and anything that comes up that looks reasonable. I mean, we went for a $70,000 loan with Snow County for one lift station, which when you think about it, that's a lot of paperwork for $70,000, but it's still a good way to go.
All right, thank you.
That was going to be my question as well. Is there a legislative agenda opportunity with this fivefold potential increase coming, where the cities that King County is servicing can go to the state during policy discussions and funding discussions and say, our residents can't afford to absorb this. Can we ask for the state to step in here and fund some of these things in place? If there is a way, that would be probably a good thing to start talking about and looking at now. But I understand if it's an enterprise fund, the state's like, no, we don't do that.
It 'tis the season for having those conversations, so we'll make note of that and share that out with our team.
Great.
I was going to add to that too. I would love more information on the governance. You had mentioned we're on an advisory board, basically, with no voting abilities. Who does get to vote on it? How do they get there? Who puts them there? Who keeps them there? All that stuff. I would love to just have that really laid out simply. Living in Snohomish County, I'm removed from it. No, I'm kidding. But it would be.
You're not.
I know. But that way we have more of an idea of, even if we're just out and about, who we might talk to if we run into them.
Yeah, we can definitely put some, it's okay, we can put some information together just to help educate, because we think this is a very important subject, so we can show what's happened in the past, and then we can do the rest. So
I have one more question around that. None of my council committee assignments cover this area. It is not my area of personal interest. I don't want to look right at Councilmember Curd, but do we have a committee that covers this where someone would be tracking it?
This has come up at PIC once, very briefly. It was information sharing, and I shared it again at council conversations, but it's something that we really just have monitoring role right now, and we kind of get the information when it comes to us. It's not really like an advocacy push at PIC, at least.
And that makes sense. I think I'm just, how do I even casually keep track of it is kind of my next question. It doesn't hit my normal sources of news.
likely receive King County Council updates in your
Yes.
inbox, and that would be where you would find updates to the wastewater treatment division.
Yeah, and what I chair, it's for our regional committees, and I think that's what you're talking about, of those assignments. It isn't as though we've opted out of participation, right? So I think the information, we can provide some governance background, and then, yeah, we'll look for that. So I just want to reassure that it's not like that, well, we thought you were too busy. So it isn't from the lack of opportunity. And then I think you're right. I think that is where the Sound Cities Association, those are some of the things of where it does exist. And again, it's still going to be then a voice as opposed to a vote.
Totally. I not that I thought that we don't have a committee for everything, nor should we, for goodness sake. But like, I was just like, how, because you just like had that ready to go. And I was like, how are you keeping track of this? But yeah.
Karsten knows things.
Come on, it's 10 o'clock.
Councilmember Aldrichs.
Also to answer Amanda's question, we, on the Solid Waste Advisory Council, we talk about rate increases regarding solid waste. It's not necessarily water, but the same kinds of, I think, pressures I think we're seeing across both. And so I think your question is like, where's the committee that talks about these rate increases coming from the county? I think that's a good one. Because if we can talk about it with other cities when it comes to our solid waste, then why aren't we talking about it when we're talking about our watery waste? That's an odd way to put it, but you know what I mean. And then the other question I have is more for staff around, so we have a federal legislative agenda and we have a state legislative agenda, but do we have a county legislative agenda? Like when the county is making decisions that affect our city, are we able to have a voice in those efforts? And are cities going on the record and telling the county what their priorities are? And yeah, so I'm curious if there's anything like that.
I think in the interest of time, we can follow up on that. I mean, there's some answers to that question, but I'd say that we're not, as an organization, we're not necessarily positioned in doing that, but we certainly do as constituents have an opportunity. So let me follow up with you on a more full answer. Appreciate the question.
Okay, 2 summary slides and one last one for utility tax. You've seen slides like this in the past. These increases are real, but we're trying to minimize them as possible. So these are typical bi-monthly customer charges. It's about 15 and every 2 months total, or about 90 for the first year, another 94 for the second. Multifamily, if you could go to the next slide, the costs are less, so the costs are proportionally lower. These numbers aren't exact; they're just percents. They're not using the actual fee schedule, so they may be there may be some rounding errors on these. Yeah. So once again, we're trying to keep the increases as low as possible. Hydrant utility tax. This will be a quick one. Back in 2012 timeframe, there were cases that you couldn't use utility funds to maintain hydrants. That should be a separate fund. I went back and forth. That legislation has changed since that time. But what the city did is they put into effect there's a 6% utility business tax on the storm sewer water, and then water pays another 5.15. How that's calculated now is you get your bill and it's the rates, and then 6% sewer, 6% storm, 11.15% water. And then what happens at the end of the year is Gretchen Zundell in finance takes that 5.1% that went to the general fund, and it has to go back to the water utility because they're the one maintaining the hydrant. So it's a math exercise. So we've talked about cleaning this up for a while, and this is a good opportunity. So what we'd like to do is take that utility hydrant expense out of the business tax, put it into the rates. What that means is someone will see, instead of a 6.25% rate increase, they'll see an effective 11.4% rate increase for water, but then a corresponding 5.15% decrease in the utility tax, so it'll be a net zero. It's a very difficult, in my opinion, we'll lean on finance to help explain that story. But right now, we'd like to demonstrate it's net zero impact, and it's the way it should be. This isn't very efficient and very, okay. That's it. Summary slide. We had some comments about the community budget survey that I was going to repeat, but now I'm not going to. They're in the agenda bill, and the same with the survey comments about the proposed rates. And next steps will be study session and hearing. No action tonight, but any comment would be appreciated.
Quick comment on utility assistance. I'm not really familiar with any programs that the city has. I don't need the information tonight, but maybe during the study session next time would be lovely.
Yes, and we can even put in the agenda bill because it's quite extensive. I wrote it all out. Just in case.
Thank you.
A little birdie said that might come up. But yeah, there are some really good programs, and there may be some opportunities in the future to increase those programs, but that's others.
And we can set up some time off as a briefing too, part of onboarding, if that's helpful.
Zoom tight. Excused?
Yes.
Yes, thank you so much for your time.
That was it.
So we do have one more topic teed up for tonight. It is the capital facilities plan process. I will note this is the first step of 3 study sessions. What essentially we've done is we're trying to mirror the process of what the capital facilities plan committee would have gone through. So again, 2 of the stakeholders are the finance director and the city manager, and so the ELT has had some conversations. We're now with council. We will also be working with board and commissions and then bringing back feedback. So tonight is an overview. We'll be back in July and then back again in the fall before all of the CFP comes together as part of the budget. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Gretchen Zundel to kick us off and walk us through what the process looks like and some of the high-level information.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. It's nice to see you all again. Thank you, Kyle and Kwan, for the introduction. Development, if you want to, okay. Development of the CFP is a sophisticated process. It represents significant investments into the Bothel's community's long-term vision by bringing major capital projects to completion. Tonight, I'm here to brief you on the capital planning process steps, review revenue projections and reserves, provide an overview of projects included in the plan, and highlight the CFP process timeline. I'll highlight the vital process steps that are described in Resolution Number 1474 adopted on March 19th. The planning process takes place in even-numbered years in coordination with the budget development process, and the first 2 years of the CFP are incorporated into the city's 25-26 budget. Capital projects and priorities are identified via established plans and capital programs, such as the Imagine Bothell Comprehensive Plan, utility comp plans, sidewalk programs, pavement and preservation program, bike plan, and parks, recreation, and open space plan. Capital project teams update project cost and revenue forecast. For an example, updates will include removal of projects that have been completed, inclusion of projects that may receive grants. The Finance Department prepares a forecast of revenues anticipated for the following 7 years to be used by the council in preparing the CFP. Capital Project Team gathers initial input from the Parks Board, Planning Commission, and the Council on future projects. Capital Project Team establishes project timing, estimates associated operating cost, identifies revenues, and makes recommendations to the executive leadership team and city manager. Lastly, council adopts the CFP. The 2025-2031 CFP is a work in progress. The local revenues are primarily made up of real estate excise tax, utility user fees, and impact fees. Currently, the estimated available fund balance for each major local revenue at year-end 2026 and year-end 2031 is shown here. Please keep in mind that the numbers will change as we continue to update project cost and revenues. REIT 1 is designated for the City Hall lease and 2 city building improvements. The $721,000 estimated imbalance at 2031 and $3.3 million estimated imbalance at 2026 include one-time general fund cost share and $1 million REIT 1 opportunity reserve. I will talk a bit more about the opportunity reserves in the next slide. REIT 2 may be only used for financing REIT 2 eligible capital projects and programs specified in the CFP. The $4.2 million imbalance at 2031 and $7.3 million at 2026 include $500,000 REIT 2 opportunity reserve. Transportation impact fee is restricted for traffic capacity projects. It is also specified in the 6-year transportation improvement plan. Estimated imbalances at 2026 and 2031 are $7.3 million and $4.2 million. I'm sorry, can I go back? Okay. At 2026 is 9.3, and at 2031, 2.3. I apologize. Park impact fee and open space fee are restricted for park systems. Estimated imbalances at 2026 and 2031 are $8.7 million and 9.3. Is it $9.1 million? Thank you. Customer user fees on utility bills and facility charges connection fees are available for allocation towards the capital projects for 3 utilities. Boyd Benson, earlier utility manager, summarized utility revenues and reserves in his presentation earlier tonight. The purpose of setting aside capital funds is to provide for necessary future capital improvement. Real estate excise tax receipts fluctuate from year to year. It is economical to establish an adequate reserve and not allocate those revenues until the funds are received. These reserves can be used as match funding for grant opportunities or to meet a need that was not identified at the time the CFP was adopted. Opportunity Fund 1 is REIT 1 reserve for the City Hall lease. After lease payments are paid in full, the reserve can be used for emergent opportunities for any allowable use of REIT 1, not included or funded in the CFP. Opportunity Fund 2 is REIT 2 reserve that can be used for opportunities for any allowable use of REIT 2 not included or funded in the CFP. Utility fiscal management requires responsible management of utility reserves and establishment of a sound reserve policy. Operating contingency reserves reduce the unknown economic risk factor associated with long-term financial planning. 16% operating reserves should be maintained in the water and sewer funds, and 32% in the storm and surface water fund. 2% of the asset replacement should be maintained in each utility fund to provide for unexpected major repairs. 10% of average annual capital projects should be maintained in each utility fund to protect against unanticipated increases in project cost. In your packet, a CFP list of estimated cost and funding sources is included in Attachment 1. The plan includes the following sections. Debt services. The plan includes 9 debt service projects. These debts are allocated anywhere from 20 to 25-year period. Facility projects. We have 3 facility projects. Shop 1 building is being replaced. City Hall window improvements will install anti-glare film on the City Hall windows, and courthouse security building improvements will improve building security. Park projects. Parks and Recreation Department is designing, constructing, and improving existing and future parks for active and passive recreation. They also continue to guide future CFP planning efforts for their park projects. Transportation projects. Capital project team continues to work on existing projects until completion, fund existing operating programs with additional funding necessary to complete the comp plan transportation element, and prioritize multimodal transportation projects. Utility projects. Capital project team is committed to maintaining and improving its utility infrastructure to preserve the existing systems, gain efficiencies, and accommodate anticipated growth. Also, I'd like to add a note about capital operating programs. Capital operating programs such as the Sidewalk program, Pavement Preservation program, Bike Plan program, and Bridge program are all ongoing capital improvement programs that, unlike capital projects, do not have a set start and end date. These programs are included in both the CFP and budget processes due to their relationship to capital and funding structure. A schedule for upcoming activities is included in Attachment 2 called CFP Process Timeline. Here on the slide, you see the next steps also include capital project team presenting the draft CFP to inform the Parks Board and Planning Commission at their meetings and receive feedback. The capital project team will hold additional study sessions with the council in July and in the fourth quarter of this year. Thank you. I welcome any comments or questions.
Again, I'll just reiterate the intent tonight is, as Director Wong would say, table setting. And so this is kind of understanding what's coming in. And again, there's more information in your packet. The July study session will be more focused on projects and again, having some feedback from the boards and commissions.
We're definitely not at our chattiest after 10 p.m. But that was very thorough, and I think we've got a really good handle on kind of what the process is. And I know we've all got lots of feelings about the capital facilities plan and the cool projects that we want to do for our community, but we probably don't need to talk about those now. So, thank you.
I just one question. I have to get it off my chest. The utilities. Earlier we talked about utilities and how they are an enterprise fund, and we have to the ratepayers have to fund this. When you talk about these utilities and reserves, is that part of that conversation we just had earlier, or is it a separate one? Like we have to have reserves from a different fund, for example.
They're the same.
Okay.
As what Boyd mentioned in his presentation.
Okay, so when he showed us those projections, these are
just showing
included.
the estimated annual revenues, and he was showing the graphs, and I was just showing the numbers.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
The range.
It's a great clarification. And yeah, it's part of how all this is intertwined and really where too the capital facilities plan really does set a strong foundation for what then goes into the budget. So while they're separate documents and plans, there's so much intertwined. Yeah, great question.
I think that's it. Let's adjourn.